morning. I'm going to call this meeting to order. First, what we have to do is establish a quorum. So what I would like to do is start with roll, and I'm going to start over here on my right-hand side with Mary.
Mary Lomaro, industry member.
Holly Cordness, industry member.
Andrew Drapkin, public member.
Rich Hedges, public member.
Dr. Carrie Williams, industry member.
Joseph Federico, industry member.
Lisa Tong, public member.
Coco Lachine, public member.
All right, I believe we have a quorum established. And then also, just for general notes today, we have a different legal counsel than normal. So, can you please introduce yourself?
I'd be happy to. Sure. Sorry, if I'd thought about it, I would have brought my name tag for my office.
It's okay.
So I'm Laura Friedman, and I am here for Rebecca Bond, who is busy getting married this weekend. So she was unavailable to be here. So I have been prior counsel to the then a bureau for a little bit of board, Barbering and Cosmetology many years ago. So I'm a little bit familiar with your laws, maybe a little rusty, but at least I understand the concepts of what you do. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, and welcome back.
Thank you.
All right. So as we start every meeting, we'll call for public comment for items that are not on the agenda. Just a reminder that we can't discuss or take action on anything that's raised during this public comment, except to decide whether it should be placed on a future agenda item. So, is there any just general public comment at this point? Please come to the podium, and if you could state your name, please, for the record.
Rochelle Freeman, and I represent the American Electrology Association Board of Electrologists in Southern California and Northern California. I wanted to bring up one thing that I realize is not on the agenda, but possibly can be put on the agenda, and that's clarification regarding some of the inspectors' sightings in our establishments. One of which is number 7351 under the professional codes. Section 7351, Business and Professional Codes, and I'm quoting, "No restrooms shall be used for storage." It is not very clear, and several of our electrologists have been cited for keeping toilet paper, keeping paper towels in their restroom. We need to have some clarification as to why that is, or if there is some variation in where it should be stored.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joyce Maxwell. I'm also from the AEA, from Electrology Association of California. And I had another question from our president, Yvette Becerra, about the new rules on sterilizing our tweezers. They are to be properly bagged in a sterilizing bag with a heat temperature change either on the bag or on the label and a date. And if there's more than one person in the establishment, then the initials of the person who sterilized them. But the way it reads, does each bag have to have a separate label that says sterilized after all of that? Or is it sufficient if all of that is fulfilled, if it's stored in a box that says sterilized tweezers? Color-coded? The label automatically is color-coded. It changes a color when it's at a certain temperature, either in the dry heat sterilizer or the autoclave. And the way it reads, like we have to put a separate, specific, special label on each bag after all of that that says sterilized. And isn't that, if it has that medical heat-changing, sterilizing label, doesn't that say that it's sterilized? So we had a question about that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
I think we'll have staff talk with you. offline.
Okay.
Staff will talk with you later.
Thank
Make
you.
sure that, make sure we all get it right.
Thanks.
Any other general comment before we move along? Public comment? Okay. As we move our way down our agenda item, the next thing is the board president's opening remarks, which is it's good to see that we have a full board again. It's exciting. And then later today, we're going to be kind of like retossing up in what is it? The committees. So I just want to make sure that for everybody who's already on an existing committee, just kind of like review that, make sure that you're really there for the diehard committees, because we want to make sure that everyone has a chance to participate in our committees. Okay. And then that's really all I have. So I'm going to move on to the executive officer report, which I imagine will be fairly longer than what I have to say. No, I'm sorry. I was just taking a guess there.
In your packets are our statistics. It's our standard information that we provide at each of the board meetings. So if you want to take a look and see if you have any questions on any of our numbers.
To the chair.
Please.
Yes, a couple things I wanted to bring up. And actually asked Christy about this earlier, and I just wanted to bring it up because I'm so happy about it. I noticed the high number of pre-apps, and some years ago, we were almost choked with pre-apps because it took so long to get a license the first time around. And this is just a normal occurrence now. It goes through so quickly, but the schools, according to Christy, are just primarily doing a lot of pre-apps. So that's really good news. Christy, why don't you tell people how long it takes to get your license once you apply?
We're scheduling right now in probably 4 to 6 weeks.
So that's
The benefit to the pre-app is the schools can apply ahead of time, and the students will know their test date prior to finishing their school.
right.
But time-wise, they're processed pretty much the same time frame, whether you're a pre-app or not.
And then the only other issue on this, we have numbers on the people that are coming into the state. And I think you're going to see why I'm asking for this later under our legislative agenda. But I've asked, and I wanted to tell the other board members and see how they feel. I'd like to know the number of California stylists that are leaving the state and getting licenses in other states. I think that's important information based on the cost of rents and the economy right now in California, which is putting a lot of stress on the people in the industry, especially in the Los Angeles area, San Francisco, and Sacramento areas.
With that, you'd have to determine that through the coordination with other state boards, correct?
Well, what we do is when someone goes to another state, they ask us for a certification letter. And so what we wouldn't know for sure if they got truly licensed, but we would definitely be able to track
How many certifications?
and I believe we track those by state.
Very cool.
Because we're pretty automated with all the other states now. We've gone to pretty much with Breeze, and the states have been able to work with us. We've got it down to a pretty electronic process, so we can definitely add that to our stats. It will be interesting to see.
Right.
Very good. Okay. Anything else, Richard?
No.
Okay. What I was actually interested in is just on initial applications. I know you always break it down for a quarter. I was just wondering, like, year over year trends. Is there more people going for licensure? Is there less? Have we seen, like, I just want to kind of see what like the curve looks like. I guess you would say.
We can show that. I can tell you that recently the Marilynello situation has definitely impacted our numbers.
Mhm.
So it will be interesting. We can show. We can go back 5 years and show the trends.
Yeah,
and
that'd be
see
great.
what we see.
All right.
Christy, I have a question. On page 4, or I should say page, item number 4, are those license issued new or renewed?
Under which applications, so are you looking at
Agenda number 4? Item
It's-
number
Oh,
4?
they're all,
Oh,
it all
it's
says
just-
agenda item
Licenses
number
issued
4.
is what you're
the
looking at.
licenses issued is new.
Okay.
Joe? Go ahead.
Christy, you just mentioned the Marinello situation. Have you seen any pickup from other schools?
So far, no. What we don't really see it until they come to apply for the exam, and we've seen definitely a decline in our exam numbers. They're just not there right now. We do think it'll even off once students, if they decided to go somewhere else and finish their courses, maybe they had some gaps in their education. So we think we're going to see it come back up, but with our number of the applications coming in, because there was a lot of Marinello schools. We definitely saw the dip in the number of exams.
I can just speak anecdotally to that, Coco, is that my school tried to welcome any Marinello transfer students by accepting all of their hours, and it was only just this week that we had like our first student who transferred over, graduated, who brought over their hours. A lot of the students, or not a lot, a selection of students were when Marinello closed, they were given the option to, you can take your hours to another school, but you're going to still be encumbered with your student loan debt, or you can basically say, I go back to zero and have all of your student loan debt erased. So it gave a lot of students a question of pause and kind of like, where do I want to go? Was the education that I was receiving at Marinello still to the point where I want to carry that burden forward? And so I was just saying, anecdotally, we had our first student, and we only maybe picked up about 10 students after the 2 closures in the Sacramento area. So just that's anecdotal evidence. So. Moving along. Agenda item number 5.
Real quick.
Yeah, please.
No, actually, on agenda number 5, we want to actually hold over the vote on the meeting minutes for April 11th. Because we need to add some information for a new requirement that we need to list board members' names on how they voted. So if we could just hold that over, we'll bring that back to.
So we
later
don't
next
need to on both of those.
The second one is okay. So the April 26th, you can.
Okay, so we
Move
can.
forward
So we're gonna skip the April 11th, and just let's focus our attention to the 26th meeting. If everyone's had a chance to review the minutes to make sure there was no edits that need to be made. Okay, seeing none, can I get a motion on the floor for an acceptance of the minutes?
I'll move.
Second.
All right. So I got a motion and a second. At this point, I'm supposed to call for public comment. Any public comment in relation to the minutes of the meeting? Seeing as there's none, I can call for the vote. So let's call for the vote, starting on my right-hand side with Mary Lou.
Yes.
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 And yes.
All right. The board meeting minutes are approved. So moving along to agenda item number 6. And the meeting, we have the appointment of committee members for standing committees. So if you open up your packets to there's a little blurb about each one of the committees. And
I'd like to remain on the committees I'm on.
you'd like to remain on the committees you were on? Okay. As I'm only on, actually, other than the DRC, which we ask everybody to participate on as whether a committee member or an alternate, I'm only on 2 committees, and I wish to stay on those committees unless we need to make room.
Do you think we could take it one committee at a time?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do that. So we're gonna start. Let's just start with in the booklet, the licensing and examination committee. Currently, we have myself as the chairperson with Mary Lou Amaro, Richard Hedges, and Dr. Carrie Williams. Would anybody else like to join that committee, or anybody else wish to vacate that committee? Seeing as there's no response, I'm going to say that the committee still stands. All right. So then let's move to the Enforcement and Inspections Committee. Once again, the current members of this committee are Richard Hedges, who stands as the chair, myself, and Polly Cordonez. Is there anybody else who wishes to join this committee or wishes to vacate this committee?
Joe, I'm not very familiar with all the communities,
Okay.
committees as of yet, but this might be an area that I would like to see
Okay.
if I can.
You would like to join the enforcement committee?
I think so for now.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'd like to join as well.
You'd like to join the enforcement committee? Okay. Is that too many people on
We
that
can only
committee?
have 4.
We can only have 4. So we would need one person to vacate the committee.
I'll vacate.
You'll vacate?
Sure.
All right. Thank you, Polly. It's a very congenial board we have. Everyone's willing to
It's really
work.
congenial.
So the next one,
Can I have a comment on it, Rose?
please.
When we did some of our hearings recently, the attorney from the Attorney General's office actually stopped me after and said, "I've never been with a board this congenial."
I can change that if you want.
Yeah,
No, don't go against the grain. It's not fun.
I think there's been a lot of hard work over the years to establish this board as a very congenial committee, and well, I think a lot of that is thanks to our executive officer and just working with everybody on the board. So, moving along, let's go down to the Legislative and Budget Committee, where Richard Hedges is the chairperson, with Mary Lou Amaro and Bobby Anderson and Andrew Drabkin. Sorry, I just had a thought. I'm like, Bobby's not here today.
Bobby's not here.
Okay. I just didn't know if she was on the phone or not. I kept on skipping her. Sorry. Okay, so current members. Anybody wish to vacate or join the Legislative and Budget Committee? See, listening to the silence, I'm going to assume that it's going to stay the same. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is something that I understand can be dealt with when you get around to it, but your board member policy about committee does say that you want to have the one person not chair more than one committee. So
Okay.
I see that Mr. Hedges is chairing both, so just when the committees reform, you'll
Okay.
keep that in mind.
These committees can go years without meeting at time.
Okay.
So the next one we have is our Education and Outreach Committee, which currently Mary Lou Amaro sits as our chairperson. In addition to that, we have Andrew Drabkin, Dr. Carrie Williams, and Polly Cordenez. Anybody wish to join or vacate that committee?
Just on a side note, that we do believe this committee will be getting active.
Yes, I saw that in the future minutes.
Yes. So.
Now I'm gonna look bad saying if I'll be willing to leave if anybody wants to. But that wasn't. I was gonna say that before that statement. But seeing that nobody wants to leave,
I'll join.
Oh,
I'll do
okay.
it. I like to be on that Education and Outreach Committee. So then we're gonna, unless any of my new members
That
want
would
to
be
join.
fine.
Sure, I'll
That's
do
what
that.
I was.
All right. So Coco, if you wish to take it, then so we're gonna swap Andrew with Coco on that committee. Very good. And then lastly, we have our Disciplinary Review Committee, which we ask all members to be.
And
a
we
part
list
of.
them as alternates
Mhm. 'Cause
in
we
case
only
of
need-
scheduling conflicts.
Yeah, because we only need 3 at a time. at
Right.
most. All right. And so, as it stands, it looks like everybody is on this committee
Except me.
except you, Coco.
I'm not listed, so if you can.
Would you like to join that committee?
Are we not supposed to be? Yeah. So,
As a practical matter, I understand that only 3 members meet
Yes.
at a time. and
Yes.
It's based on availability.
Yes. I wasn't trying to twist your arm to join the
I
committee.
know.
Saying
Ouch.
everybody does it, but
Through the chair.
please.
What we do when we get new folks, we ask them to come and sit in the meeting and listen to it at least one time for to sit on, so they'll feel comfortable, because you're actually listening to cases and ruling on them, and if you don't have some experience. So I don't think that's a violation to have someone sitting in the audience that's from the board listening to them.
No.
It's an open session.
Yeah, it's an open session.
The key is just that in some settings, and this might be one, we just generally encourage them not to participate, simply to avoid the appearance of.
They can't, there's only 3 sheets to vote on.
Okay. So we did that one. So let's go to item number 7, which is proposed board meeting dates and locations for 2017. This is agenda item number 7 in our. So.
Just.
We need to actually a motion
Oh.
for those
I
committees.
believe that's how your policy.
Oh,
reads
okay.
on
So I'm
this, is
sorry.
that there should be
So
a
moving back to
motion.
agenda item number 6, So is it just one general motion to set all the committees?
I think with the changes that you've announced, although I don't know if staff wants you to go over them one more time, or do you feel like you've
No,
adequately
we're good.
noted them?
All right.
I think your discussion during the changes were fairly consistent, but I think the board itself should
Okay.
make a motion to.
Move
So
approval
create all those
of the committee choices.
I'll second it.
All right, so I've got a motion and a second. I'm going to call for public comment. Seeing as there's no public comment on the committees, I'm going to call for the vote, and I'm going to start on my left-hand side.
Coco, yes.
Lisa, yes.
Joseph, yes.
Dr. Carey, yes.
Rich Hedges, yes.
Andrew Drafkin, yes.
Polly Coordinates, yes.
Mary Lou Amaro, yes.
All right, motion passes. Now moving to agenda item number 7, which is proposed dates for future board meetings.
So these are tentative, but we do like to post them on our website. So hopefully we can stick to them if that's what the board chooses for these dates. They can be changed, but we'd like to have the dates kind of far in advance because we are looking at reinstatements as well. Right now we have a 2-day meeting scheduled for January. We don't have any pending reinstatements. So there's a very good chance some of these meetings will be just one meeting, one-day meetings.
Are any of these dates like centered around like industry events or anything like that? Just are they
No.
completely independent of that? Okay.
Should we also assume they're not holidays?
Correct.
All right. Is there any comment from my board members about any of these dates? Any objections to any of these proposed dates?
Just out of curiosity, how do we select the cities?
Well, we just select them. We're certainly open.
Yeah, there's some general language in the general provisions of the Business and Professions Code that apply to all the different boards, and basically what those do is say we like to spread it around so that you're meeting in the various areas where your population is, so that the opportunity for public participation is increased.
On July 18th, that is a meeting for our strategic planning that will be held in Sacramento, and that date is a firm date that we've set with the DCA folks that help us go through the strategic planning session. So hopefully that date works.
It's already. Do we do that every 5 years? It's already been 5 years since we've done that. I've been on this board a long time.
You have 2 children since then.
Yeah, I know. All right. Wow. Okay. Moving along to agenda item number 8.
Oh, yeah, no.
Unless there's something else in there.
Do we need to vote on?
Motion.
No. Oh, we do have to make a motion on the
I will.
dates? All right. So,
Move approval of the dates is listed in the agenda.
Second.
all right. So I've got a motion. I've got a second. Any public comment in regards to this agenda item? Seeing as there is none, I will call for the vote. And once again, I'll start on my left-hand side.
Mary Lou Amaro, yes.
Oh,
It's all right. We can start with you, Mary Lou. You were excited to vote. I
Because
understand.
we were curious on the Cosmoprof show. We were looking it up.
Yeah,
on
it's
that.
okay.
Okay.
Polly Coordinates, yes.
Andrew Drafkin, yes.
Rich Hedges, yes.
Dr. Carey Williams, yes.
Joseph Federico, yes.
Lisa Tong, yes.
Coco, yes.
All right, motion passes. So now we can move to agenda item number. I'm just so excited. I want to just keep on moving through this agenda without calling for the motions. All right, so this is agenda item number 8, and once again, I think I need to defer to Christy Underwood, our executive officer, for this.
so as you all know, during our sunset review hearing, some of the legislation that came out of that required us to establish a health and safety advisory committee. So we had a very preliminary meeting, and these are the sort of the topics that are listed in your packet that came out of the meeting. I want to call it a hearing. So very brief. We're meeting again on August 8th here in Southern California. We will be publicly noticing these meetings. Something that we have recently been advised is that when we have a meeting for one, it's a statutorily mandated meeting, so we need to make sure we publicly notice it for that reason. But also with just 2 members discussing, even if they're non-board members, right?
Yeah, as long as it's a committee advisory to the board, that
Any-
has the authority.
Then it needs to be publicly noticed.
So if we have staff basically running two members of staff running an event? I'm thinking,
No, it's only the board members.
okay, only board members will be
That are the
present.
problem, or appointees. They could be non-board members if you had a committee, a true committee
Okay,
of the board that has a designated role to give advice to the board.
okay.
Then that would need to
Because
be
I
noticed.
and
as
it's
well.
whenever there's two or more present.
Um, it's not just whenever there's
Two or more with a
yes,
set
usually-
agenda.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's whether or not they're a true committee.
Yeah.
So there are some times when, during a board meeting, you might have a bill and staff wants to get comments from maybe two members. That's a different role where the committee, the two people aren't coming together and
Yeah.
collectively giving advice to the board.
Yeah.
Anytime we're here where you've got the committee is actually forming opinions and actually making motions and giving advice to the board, that's a committee that needs to be noticed,
Okay.
even if it only has two members.
I was just making sure that if we do like any outreach events or we have two members there, like you're not having to notice that.
No, not as long as they're not
Yeah.
discussing the board's business, not as part of sort
Yeah.
of the presentation that's
Yeah.
available to everybody.
Understand. Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Actually, I have a question.
Please go ahead.
So for the committee, since this will be publicly noticed, does that mean the committee members are not allowed to communicate with one another outside of the publicly noticed meetings?
About the subject of this committee, correct?
Okay.
All right.
Housekeeping, I'm not worried about. Does the
Yeah.
state work for you? Yes, no, then that's okay.
All right. Do we need a call?
No.
Nothing on
That's
this.
just an update.
All right. So then we can move along to agenda item number 9, correct? And agenda item number 9 is it's gonna be a fun one. This is about the personal service permit. So it's time to defer back over to Christy.
It's gonna be a fun one.
Yeah.
So, as you know, the legislature put in statute that we are to look at implementing the personal service permit, whereas someone can perform services outside of a licensed establishment. We held 4 meetings, 2 in Southern California, 2 in Northern, to stakeholder meetings, because that's what we were actually required to do. We also put up a survey online. In the North, we did not have a lot of participation. Our second meeting did have a few more than the first one. The first one only had 1 member, and the Southern California got a lot more attendance than in the North. We had one at Riverside Community College, whereas a lot of community college students and staff attended. And then we had another one that we held at the Paul Mitchell School in Santa Ana, Costa Mesa. And we had a lot of attendees from chain salon owners. We had a lot of attendees at that one as well. So in your packets is a summary of all the information that we gathered. It was hard. We thought we would be able to come to you with a very clear-cut summary of one or the other, or how we want to go.
I read this. There seemed to be no
There's
general consensus.
There's no general consensus. We have talked with. Okay. We have talked with legal about the way the statute was written, and I know that in my discussions with different legislative staff, they wanted us to go back to the stakeholders to decide how the board would implement this and if we really wanted to have the personal service permit. After meeting with legal, and we met with both our legal counsel, Rebecca, and Laura, who's helping us today, it does say we shall do regulations.
So we need to come up with some kind of regulation for the PSP.
Right.
So the statute is pretty clear under subdivision. It's section 7402.5. Did I turn that on? 7402.5. Subdivision C says the board shall issue regulations regarding a personal service permit. In establishing the regulations, the board shall hold at a minimum 2 stakeholder meetings. And I think the language that became confusing earlier is that subdivision B of the statute says the board may issue a personal service permit to an individual who meets the criteria for a personal service permit set forth in the regulation. So I think the challenge there is that the may speaks to the discretionary nature that generally the EO has in issuing any type of license. In this case, it's just the personal service permit. And I think that may have been where the confusion came.
So just to decode this or decipher this a little bit, basically, we've been handed that we have to do the PSP, and it's just up to us and how we want to regulate the PSP.
Correct.
So the PSP is here to stay.
And the requirements,
And the requirements for the PSP.
because there's still the section on if we decide if we're going to tie it to an establishment, if we're going to limit the services. So that can
Right.
be discussed as well.
Okay.
And that was brought up in
Yeah.
most of our stakeholder meetings, and there were a lot of comments on that as well.
Through the chair,
Please.
I have some comments.
Of course you
I looked this over carefully. I thought about it quite a while. And I will say that we are not ever going to be able to control for people who receive services. And with digitalization of the world, clever entrepreneurs have figured out that they can actually set up an app and get individuals to buy their own tools, to get their own car, to use all of their own equipment, and they can get a piece of the action. And they can control the flow of the money. So we're not going to stop that. This is actually, in our industry, happening all over the world. It's actually happening in Africa. PBS had a long news article on it I think it was the regular PBS station. I watched so many of from the different countries that we have, like the BBC and the African, the Middle Eastern. So, but I'm pretty sure this was Africa. I know it's Africa. It's PBS. So we're not going to stop it. Having said that, and looking at the comments from the people in the industry that took time to make the comments, and looking at the information on the poll that was taken on our website and also on a Facebook page in the industry, I just have this comment to make. The newspaper where I live, I was running an election for the city on a measure. They put out a poll saying who was in favor of it. 95% were against it on the newspaper poll. And we won the measure by 70%. So unless you can tell me these polls are a scientific random sample, I never pay attention to them because they're not valid. So then what do? I look at the comments of people who are thoughtful and took the time to write the comments. And I can tell from the comments they didn't write more than one, and I don't know how many voted more than once on the polls. So I look at that and I say, then I need to focus on what the industry said. The industry, in their comments, were not very happy about this, in my estimation. There were some that were, but overwhelmingly not. So if we have to do this, it has to be tied to a brick and mortar license. We're not going to be able to control it any other way. I'm really concerned with the health and safety of individuals because unless someone who's running the app is very, very circumspect on what they're doing, we'll have an awful lot of non-licensed people doing services in the home. And we're not going to be able to control for that. There's just no way. So in many ways, much of this is going to be out of our control. For instance, one of the two, I think it was Uber, was in Austin, Texas, and they tried to regulate them by just having their Uber drivers do a background check. They pulled out of Austin completely. Thought they would hurt Austin, but Austin said, no, you didn't. We have our own app. We've set up our service, and we're background checking our folks. So I don't think we're going to set up an app because I don't think we can under California law, so we can't do that. So the next best thing is to try to control for health and safety through a brick and mortar shop. So that's what I've got to say now. I may have more comments in the future on this.
I want to just make my general comments about this. I'm of two hearts when it comes to this. It's, if I step away from it and as a private person, as a school owner, and as a business person, I could see the benefits of this. I could see it's you never want to stifle innovation. if this was an industry board, like if it was a professional industry board, I could totally see us taking the reins and pushing this forward. But we are our mission is client and safety protection, and that's what is paramount to this board. And so, and how do we reconcile client and safety protection in a place where we obviously know we're never going to be able to inspect or how to inspect? And I think that, especially if you just give it to anybody, I think tying it, as Richard said, to a brick and mortar establishment license is going to be one of the few ways that you can have some modicum of control over this. Just ensuring that if this establishment is still following the rules, then hopefully that by extension, when they're going out and about, they're still following the rules and regulations of state board. It's gonna be a tough one to figure out. Any other comments from my fellow board members?
Yes, I have some comments. I agree. Since we have to do it, we're going to have to be very diligent in figuring out how to regulate this. I share the same sentiments. It's really going to be difficult to, regulate. I think a lot of it's going to come through the education, like educating our consumers and making them aware that if they're choosing to receive services in their places of work, at their home, educating them on asking individuals who are providing the services for their license and being aware that there is, recourse if they're injured or experience any harm during the service. And as far as it being tied to establishments, I think we might run into the same issue. So we're really going to have to flesh it out when we have establishment owners who have independent contractors, because since they're not employees, it becomes very difficult to really regulate what your independent contractors are doing once they leave the establishment. And so, we already receive a lot of complaints from establishment owners when they receive fines that they have no control, they're independent contractors. So I feel that with this PSP, let's say we have a client who contacts a salon to schedule an appointment with, independent contractor, and they have a complaint, how will we then deal with the disciplinary action between the independent contractor who may not inform their establishment that they're going to go do a service. So I feel like we're going to have to really just try to flesh out the details between employers who have employees, where it may be a little bit easier, where you have to book your service through the establishment, and then independent contractors whose clients oftentimes just contact them directly, and the establishment owner may have no idea, but then suddenly they receive a complaint against their establishment because a personal service was provided, out of the establishment. So I'm going to continue to, as we receive more comments, try to maybe come up with suggestions on that, because as a salon owner, I've had independent contractors, and now I'm an employer. So, I'm just trying to think through some of the scenarios that I had to experience being a salon owner. Yes, those are definitely some of the things I think we need to consider with the PSP, knowing that we have to offer, provide regulation for it.
I've already spoken, so if nobody else has a comment, I want to make a
Coco, I believe.
Yeah, I agree with what Richard said earlier regarding the input that you provided, which is extensive, because as with polls, this is not a poll, but it really depends on the people who makes the comment on their personal, and it's not big enough of a random sampling to actually get a gauge of the industry. Just like any polls, political polls today, there's this poll, but it's only based on that sampling that they have. So but I do appreciate the comments that were made. One of the comments made was, whatever we do, or what kind of regulation we do, is that we're not necessarily preventing harm from happening, that the recourse is after the fact if there is harm actually involved. And I'm of the two minds here also, in that we don't want to stifle individual entrepreneurship, that a person can go into business on their own. And I read a lot of comments from businesses that say it's hard to find staff. I'm not sure I agree with that completely. So I'm just going to throw this out, and just a possibility that rather than necessarily tying it to an establishment, how about maybe we can engage professional industry organization that someone can register with those professional organizations, and so no one necessarily have to be employed with an establishment as long as they are a member of a professional organization. And maybe that is a way that we can issue permit too, through professional organizations. By, of course, making sure that they're licensed and all those.
So I understand why that's something that's appealing to the board, because it could be something that already exists. But unfortunately, the way that you're the permit itself has to be issued by this board. So without a statutory change, you wouldn't be able to do that through regulation.
No, I agree. The permit will still be issued by the board, but as long as they're a member of a professional organization, not necessarily employed with an
So
establishment.
to make that a qualification
Yes.
of issuing the PSB, okay.
Please.
My feeling is that a lot of our industry people are very, very astute. And I will tell you that the more aggressive salons that go after business will have their own website or their own app for this. So I think an awful lot of it is going to be done through brick and mortar establishments anyway. And my guess is there will eventually be an app to sell to individual establishments if they don't have their own website where they can do this kind of thing. So I think awful lot of the permitting will be people who are already tied through a relationship with a salon. So I think we really need to look in that direction in order to try to have some control of this, because we're not going to have a lot of control over it.
So just a couple points to bring up that, we will set the requirements for this in regulation. And some of the items that did come up during the discussions as doing fingerprints to do clearance.
Like the live scan.
Right, because we don't do that
Insurance.
now in our establishments, and now we would be issuing a certificate to somebody who would be going into a person's home. Limiting services, that was a discussion we brought up. Do we really want color to be done in a home?
Yeah.
Because then there could be, we've had complaints before at the board. There are obviously allowances for home salons, but there's some counties don't allow that, and so we've had to involve code enforcement because they're disposing of chemicals in the drains in residential areas. So there's that to consider. And then how long have they been licensed? Do we want a student that's just got their license yesterday to be able to go into somebody's home tomorrow? So those are all factors that can be looked at, and regulations can be developed and brought back to the board to look at if the board is liking those requirements. That's where we're going to end up going is preparing a regulation package to bring back to the board and hash out when we finally go to post our regulations and have public hearings on that.
Should we have an enforcement meeting for that?
Wouldn't it be an enforcement meeting, or would we create like almost a separate task
It would-
force or committee for it?
I think it's enforcement committee because we're the ones that deal with it.
Well, it's really licensing to start with,
Okay.
because we want to develop the requirements for
Right, you're
the licensing first.
But I think it should be done through the committee process.
So we could, the board could vote today to ask that committee to take this issue up.
I just want to bring up some additional points on this that you highlighted. Is that as my standpoint is that I've already stated that I believe it should be done through a brick and mortar salon or a brick and mortar institution, but through the sausage making process of creating the regulation, if it does fall back in an individual can just get a PSP, there definitely needs to be a proof of liability insurance that person is containing a liability insurance. And that someone brought up a point that maybe or in here that they need to have almost an additional course that they need to go through. And I mean, and then also I feel that the PSP should at maximum be like an annual, like an annual expiration. Every year it expires and they have to pay it, and then that there should also be an additional charge for the PSP in addition to the license. That it's not like, oh, I'm gonna get my license now, I'm gonna add on the PSP, and then I'm gonna freewheel it.
I have something to add
Please.
to that as well. I mean, I think that keeping in mind we are consumer affairs board primarily and looking out for consumer safety, I think that having some type of requirement around citation history, especially if they have a history of health and safety violations, I don't think someone like that should be able to have a personal service permit. And in thinking through what types of services can be provided in the home as well, I don't think that there can be the same level of assurance in a home for certain types of services. And so I do think that there at least initially needs to be some type of limitation around that. We might even want to consider at the beginning of this rollout, once we start to do this, some type of collection of data either from consumers or from those providing the services as a check to see how this is going and whether or not changes need to be made.
Yes. So I just had an idea. In an effort to keep record, maybe we could also consider. I know we're going to take this to the licensing committee, but you know how like our manicurists are required to keep logs of their pedicure tubs. That maybe those individuals who have PSP, something to consider is keeping a log, and in that log, they can document, yeah, exactly where they've performed the service, the client's name, address, and email address. And then maybe quarterly or yearly, email surveys can be sent to clients who have received services outside of a traditional brick and mortar establishment. Because sometimes we have consumers who aren't aware, again, it's going to take a lot of education, aren't even aware that they can file a formal complaint if they were dissatisfied with the service or experience any harm. So this would allow them where we're being proactive and maybe sending a survey or, trying to get feedback where those clients may not be aware, then they get an email and it's like, oh, well, this was my experience when this licensee, came into my home. And Mr. Federico and I were just stating that maybe even in issuing this particular permit, similar to when I hire a plumber or an electrician, their license number is on their card. This will also maybe help in the education part of educating the consumer and informing them that if they do have a complaint and they have this licensee's business card, they also have their license number. And then maybe I think that may trigger that I can report this license number if I was unhappy, if I was hurt, during my service.
And as Carrie was talking, my brain was going, and what I also just thought about is like with like the introduction of these apps, and I think some of the comments made this kind of brought up this point, is that with the introduction of these apps, if the app is like an all-encompassing beauty app, right, and so you can the definition of beauty services is very open-ended, in that some of those beauty services may not necessarily require like a license, like if you're doing makeup application. So when someone's utilizing this app, like one day they might be getting makeup and not realizing that this is in fact or then one day they might be getting hair services and not realizing that in fact that there's a distinction between there, that one is almost like that one of these persons is unlicensed and one of these persons is licensed.
Well, if they're getting money for the makeup, they need to be licensed.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Well, they might just be
Braiding
demonstrating.
is a good example.
Yes. Well, I'm just saying they might be demonstrating the makeup on the person.
Joe, can I add something?
Please.
Yeah, Christy brought up something that is a concern to me when you mentioned something about fingerprinting and stuff like that. Because unlike a brick and mortar store, when you go in there, liabilities are, is the responsibility of brick and mortar store, damages and stuff like that. However, if we issue this permit and we're actually saying that we check their background, criminal backgrounds and stuff like that, and then this person goes to a home, robs the home, damage the home, assault the people, or whatever they do, does that liability then becomes the state's liability or this board's liability because we issued the license?
No. So I can answer a few things, and I'll go recency first because I think that's probably the biggest concern to the board. So the department does have other agencies that regulate people who go into the homes. I mean, the one that's jumping to my mind is electronic and appliance repair dealers. So the people that go into your home, generally they have to have a license and they have to, they're screened, and that's the reason. One of the reasons that one wants to know. But the liability. The board's liability is to review that and make a determination whether or not any criminal history is substantially related. Criminal history doesn't necessarily make you unqualified or prevent you from being able to obtain a license. It just means that the board or the board staff is going to be evaluating to determine whether or not they think that there's enough of a connection between the criminal history and what you'll be doing. In order to determine whether or not it should prohibit you from having that license. So, but there's no liability once licensed. The acts of the person are still not. They should. It doesn't ever prevent somebody from filing a lawsuit, but there's no reason that the board should carry any liability for that. So. The other thing that I heard mentioned was with regard to a notice. A lot of our client agencies have notices to consumer, and I know this board has one that it's posted on the wall. I know you have a regulation you're going to be talking about that as well. But there's nothing to prohibit you from requiring sort of a similar notice to the client when the person goes into the home, and so maybe determining what the contents of that are, if it includes the state board's website and notice that they can file a complaint, or maybe it's a receipt that's required that contains that notice or something like that. But those are options that you have. And then the final thing that I did here that I just want to kind of address, the statute does say that the personal service permit shall be valid for 2 years and renewed prior to expiration, and then it actually has a fee of no greater than $50. So there's a 2-year renewal requirement.
So it basically just go with their
statute.
license, but it can be an additional.
But
fee
it is an additional
right.
fee. Yeah.
Okay.
So you would have to obtain both your I'm going to call it a baseline license as well as the PSP license.
Please.
I have agreed with everything everybody said. I mean, I think this has been a good discussion, and I agree with Coco. I think it has to be tied to brick and mortar and through the board. But any way we can connect it with the professional organizations would be good too, because they could help us and help us by education and other things to make sure that this is done properly. I will say this: in the litigious society that we have, people that have these websites or apps, if somebody goes to a lawyer, I can tell you right now, the first thing the lawyer is going to do is find one other person and file a class action suit, and they're gonna get a subpoena for all of the records of everybody that's ever applied to this app or this website, and then they're going to do mailings to them to try to bring them into a class action lawsuit. So this may be a double-edged sword for businesses. I'm not going to go into it now, but there's all kinds of communities where there are people who are part of that community or used by lawyers to root these kinds of things out. So, and that's not a negative comment on lawyers at all, because I actually use lawyers all the time, and they've kept me out of trouble. But so I don't have a problem with lawyers, but I know there is part of the profession that operate that way, and so this may be just another opportunity for people who do look for opportunities to file class action lawsuits. So I guess I would say that we may be doing people a favor if we require they have liability insurance.
Yeah, I actually have two other things I'd like to bring up. I mean, most of this is stemming from the innovative economy and app creators, and I'm wondering how much we can work with the people on that end of things, because I feel like we're talking a lot about how we can regulate on the licensee side, which is our role, but I feel like a lot of these questions can also be posed to the app creators in terms of if they are bringing in licensees to provide these services, how can we as BBC require the app creators to follow certain things, such as when providing some of the BBC regulations as a part of the app. When clients sign up to use the app, they are provided with BBC information about consumer protection and different things that we typically have establishments post in the establishment would be required of the app creators to post prior to anyone signing up for the services. And so I think we can maybe find some ways to work with them to get ahead of it versus requiring it after the fact. And I don't know how we could play a role in that since they are a business and we're not regulating businesses.
Right. You don't have jurisdiction over like a third party app, but you would have control over the licensee, and we could look at whether or not. And I would actually defer to Rebecca on this, but you could look at whether or not you might be able to say, as part of your regulations controlling the licensee, that if a licensee uses an app, it shall be an app that contains the following,
I actually have a
protections
question about that.
or provisions.
Why wouldn't we be able to require the app holder to have, if they're sending people out to do cosmetology service, why couldn't we force them to have an establishment license? That would be
That's
some
what they're
control
going to
over.
do, though. They're going to open up a brick and mortar place, and it'll be a shell
Right.
for their 450 people across the state.
Yeah, you
kind
go
of
and
a thing.
inspect it, and there's nothing to even inspect because
Right.
there's no.
Yeah, but
I mean, that's going to be the issue. I mean, I understand the desire to tie it to a brick and mortar for public safety, but that's the initial first workaround that I figured out, and that's going to be our problem is just trying to figure out how are they going to game the system and try to prevent regulations to prevent that gaming.
But if we require a license of the app, not just the brick and mortar, and we get a tremendous amount of consumer harm from the people who are using that app, we can shut the license down, then they have to operate underground.
We'd have to have
we
the
have that
statutory
authority. Yeah, we'd have to have
authority.
statutory
I-
authority.
So we can't do that.
I don't know. My recollection of what the description of an establishment is, I don't think that would include it.
Is a description of
It's where it's the place.
Yeah, is an established. But I was going to say, is an establishment description
Physical place.
a regulatory or a statutory?
It's a statute. I'm almost positive.
Um,
7346.
I'm going to call for a motion that we're gonna move this over to the licensing and examination committee. But I want to make sure that all board members here have voiced their opinions so that we can take these insights into when we go into the licensing examination committee. So if there's anybody else who hasn't spoken, I would really like them to get them on the record about this.
Well, I was just going to suggest that we have PSV licensees wear a sandwich board with our rules and regulations, and that way.
You want me to make a motion?
I like that one.
Just a quick note that the establishment is defined as the establishment means any premise, building, or part of a building where activity licensed under this chapter is
We have
practiced.
to add app.
I have an additional question.
Please.
Actually, and this is a very, I think, a very technical question in terms of the way we collect data and how we can make licenses searchable. And I don't know if this has ever been discussed in the past. Thinking from a consumer standpoint, if they have the name and the license of somebody, are they able to search for, any history of that? And I don't know if you want to go there. I know there's privacy.
Currently, they
concerns.
can check with if the license is in good standing. They
Right.
can't check any citation history in regards to that.
It's not online, correct? If disciplinary action had taken place, that would be online.
Okay.
What would you consider about what's the
Formal
level? Of,
taken
suspended or
Right.
put them on a suspension or something like that.
Or taken away. Citation and fines are not.
Would
considered discipline.
would state board would have no jurisdiction over over the app creator for sharing of data or like I'm saying where someone schedules an appointment or someone schedules an appointment to show up at their house in 3 days for through the app, could that data somehow be forwarded through state board so that hey, on the 3rd day the inspector can show up with and be there.
Can we send
I'm
an
not, I'm not saying
inspector
that.
to
I'm
the
saying
individual?
I know
home?
that I know how crazy that sounds when it comes to like implementing.
But I don't think you can send an inspector to an individual's home.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just
Now maybe we can somehow try to figure out a way to, like, surprise inspections. You must come bring your equipment to us, and I mean, if something's soiled and stuck in a sterile, labeled sterile thing, we can't really tell. But unless there's a lot of hair in it, kind of a thing. But that's what we're going to catch is the stupid people
Right.
and not the
Yeah.
not the smart people. if they do that.
but who doesn't brush their teeth before they go to the dentist?
Right. And there are,
Well, but that's
you
the
know,
thing.
there,
There's a lot of people that don't. They're the stupid people.
there are other states that are doing this, and you know, they have some regulations that say everything has to be transported in an airtight container. Everything has to be disposable. We have talked to a group from New York, Manicube, who wanted to bring their business model into California. They go into, we've talked about this before, but they are going into corporate offices and providing manicures during someone's lunchtime break. They do have a website where you could schedule it. And they had an incredible business model. All their items were disposable. They were doing basically waterless manicures. I think they were doing pedicures as well.
But no,
But-
like
but-
artificials.
I'm sorry?
No artificial nails or anything that
No.
require ventilation.
And so they have a kit that they would provide to their manicurist, and it's one kit per each service. Everything is disposable down to the nippers. But this was, you know, these guys are operating in several other states and wanted to come into California. It was a great business model. That doesn't mean everybody's going to have that type of business model. So
I have a recommendation.
Please.
But
I just wanted to ask a quick question,
Sure,
if that's
go ahead.
possible. So, basically, the legislature has directed us to establish a PSP permit. If we say, we're going to make a motion shortly to develop regulations, how long from that motion until a permit will be generated, do we think?
2 years.
Yeah.
2 years. Does the legislature, is it vague enough to, as we say, limit services? So let's say we just do a nail personal service permit, see how that works before we expand further? Or is it, you're going to do a permit and it's going to be, they're basically implying it's for everything that we offer, we service kind of a thing.
The legislature specifically granted the board the authority to determine which
So we can.
licensing categories that could apply for this permit.
So we
So
can,
you can say, which
Nails,
services you think.
Well, I think,
And you can
unfortunately, we
pilot
open the
program.
door, it's going to get pushed further open, but I'm wondering if we develop it,
Pilot
go,
program.
we go slowly with this, with the intent of, obviously, probably eventually offering more, but at least not try to solve this all with one big solution and just go piecemeal.
I like your thinking, Andrew.
this is not out of the normal, something like this happening. I've seen with several different areas I'm involved in, corporations with a business model come in and get the state of California to limit what people can do to stop it. I'll give you an example. When Dish started doing business in California before they opened up shop, they got a law passed through the legislature that homeowners associations couldn't stop the placement of the discs in their homeowners association. So this is not, I'm not surprised by this. It's coming. I'm sure the industry had a lot to do with it. We just have to deal with it. And so, having said that, I like everything everybody said, and with the insurance and everything. And I think we need to move forward on this. We need to put it to the appropriate committee, and we need to take public comment, because I got a feeling there's folks out there that have a lot to say.
So you want to make the formal?
I move that we take this to the licensing committee for vetting and establishing regulations to be brought back to the board for discussion.
I'll second that. So I got a motion and a second. Now it's time for the fun. Public comment.
Good morning. Fred Jones on behalf of the Professional Beauty Federation of California. I attended the 2 Northern California stakeholder meetings, so I don't want to
You were
be
the one.
repetitive. I was the one once and one of a few, fortunately, including your father,
Yeah.
the second one. In the your packets, it has a good summary of some of the arguments I made. But I want to run through just some highlights. On the issue of the survey, we actually had 2 ladies come to the Northern California meeting, salon owners, in support of the PSP. By the time they had heard the dialogue, they had flipped. So folks, on a survey, if you're asked, do you want to be allowed to drive 100 miles an hour on a freeway? What do you think the survey result will be? Do you want to be allowed to ... I don't care what you put at the ... They're going to say yes. But when they actually hear the facts and some of the concerns, as was the experience at one of these stakeholder meetings, then they make a more enlightened decision. And I believe that's going to be largely the case with the personal service permit. I did provide these ladies, as well as others that were watching on the webcast, and I'll highlight again today, understand the pressures that are on brick and mortar establishments in California right now, particularly employer-based salons. Some of them will be near doubling the minimum wage that they are paying their stylists and technicians from just 5 years ago in the next 3 years. That's serious. If they were a commission employee-based salon, probably most of them won't be able to be commission anymore under the new law AB 1513, which is not only a paperwork nightmare, there's also back liability issues that salons are facing, and then ongoing requirements that substantially raise the cost of providing a commission-based wage under what California Labor Code calls piece rate. When workers' compensation rates skyrocketed in this state in the late 80s, early 90s, one of the direct results of that cost of having employed stylists was to go to booth rental model. And it started here in California. And now nationwide, at least 70% of salons are booth rental based, and probably a higher percentage here in California, which led that way. Now, my association is not against legitimate, legal booth rental. We do not want to quell the entrepreneurial spirit of this industry. However, there are a considerable number of booth rental-based operations that are illegally operating today. And if they were audited by EDD or Department of Industrial Relations, I believe the vast majority would be found to, in fact, be an employer-employee-based salon, meaning they are felons because they are not providing workers' compensation to their employees because they're wrongfully classifying them today as booth renters, independent contractors, when in fact that's not how they're being treated. So, taking this 30,000 feet above the air perspective of all the pressures, legal and precedent and historic, and the ability of this industry to move quite fluidly when pressures are placed upon it, and some of the unintended consequences that flow from that, I think it is very wise of this board to walk cautiously on the idea of allowing people to perform beauty services on consumers for monetary amounts in places that will never be inspected by your inspectors, that cannot ever be inspected by your inspectors. That's a problem. So, if you move forward with the regulation, and I still believe there is an if to this,
the code section is very strange, and I think there was a reason why it begins with the word may and then proceeds to the word shall. May provides you flexibility of deciding, are we really going to embrace this and move forward or not? And then the shall will be, if you decide to move forward with a personal service permit, then this is what you have to include in your regulations. I think there's a legal argument. The way that the statute's written, I still maintain you have the legal authority to say, I don't think we're going to, after we've considered all the stakeholders' meetings, which is required by the statute, and after we've considered our primary mission of consumer protection, we don't think we have the capability of protecting consumers if we authorize personal service permits. Having said that, and again, we have at least 2 lawyers in the room, so we probably have 4 legal opinions that we could give you right now. Having said that, as you deliberately, as Andrew said, methodically move forward in a regulation consideration process, we definitely think you should take an all-the-above approach, look at all the other states, see all of the requirements that they've made, and so long as it doesn't violate any express provision of this BMP code, include it. So liability insurance coverage, and I think you should be very specific on what the minimums should be. You don't want a $1,000 liability policy. Not that you would get one sold in the market, but I think you should be very specific. Background checks. I think you've already discussed, and the statute expressly provides which services will be permitted in a non-establishment place. We would very much support tying it to a physical location. And admittedly, my board's somewhat mixed on this. I think the bulk of them are moving toward it should be a licensed establishment. And to prevent something that Andrew brought up, you ought to consider limiting the number of personal service permits tied to any particular brick and mortar. So if they have 1,500 people at 123 3rd Street, chances are they ain't too legit. And why? Why should it be tied to a physical location? Well, it provides your inspectors a point of contact so they can look at their records, the background checks that I mentioned, and everything else, the liability coverage. They could also test them. What are your protocols when you go into somebody's home and do a manicure or a pedicure? And if they don't measure up, that's a pretty good indicator they're not following protocols, appropriate protocols when they're out in the field. And again, I stress, doing services on consumers that you will never be able to inspect. You cannot follow them out in the field where they will be doing these services. So these are just some of the concerns I've highlighted in the past. I look forward to engaging with you on this. I will say this in closing. The business model and the only interest group that came to the legislature that got AB 181 amended to include the personal service permit is no longer in this state. So the model that Christy just described, which I think is a great business model, it's no longer on the table. There is no business model that replicates what Manicube was proposing to do in our state. Okay? B, you shouldn't look at the brighter angels of human nature when you design regulations. You should look at the darker impulses of human nature and plan for the worst, not the best. So even if Manicube was moving into our state, don't think blindly and with great hope and aspiration that they would all follow that business model. Guess what? They won't. Regulations become a ceiling, not a basement or floor. So we need to have a very serious discussion about this. Again, I maintain legally, you guys have a legal right to say after all of this, we've decided not to move forward. But from a practical vantage point, there is no interest group in the state capitol that's going to be pushing for this. All that the statute says is, in July of 2017, come back to the committee and give us a report on the process and progress. That's it. You don't have to have an established regulation by then. You don't have to even start promulgating any of these permits. Just come back and report on the progress of your deliberations. So slow walk, be deliberate, all the above options, a lot of specificity, and let's just move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have some questions dealing with electrolysis and home services. I have heard some electrologists think that it's legal to provide home services if there's a medical need. I'm not sure what the criteria is, but I have also heard that some electrologists provide those services to affluent clients for a very high rate. Is that legal? Does that matter? Would that fall under this jurisdiction? Also, there are some electrologists who may rent a room either in a doctor's office that's not associated with dermatology. It may be an orthopedist, a podiatrist, a dentist. And those people may believe that they don't have to have an establishment license or a business license. Or if they rent a room from an office suite, where you rent rooms either by the day, by the week, or by the month. And the office suite business clearly states that they have no connection with any licenses of people who rent rooms from them. Most of the people are some kind of a psychotherapist, maybe a massage therapist, maybe an acupuncturist. This is not a spa or salon. So what is the belief system or the criteria there that these people feel that they don't need an establishment license?
They absolutely need an establishment license right now. So all of them. And we have lots of doctor's offices that offer different services, and the establishment license is there. And right as of today, no personal service permit. Everything has to be done in a licensed salon.
And what about the electrologists who do advertise that they provide home services?
It's not allowed. So if we have a complaint, we will look into that.
Well, what about if there's a medical criteria?
Oh, I'm sorry.
But some of these people who are medical clients, they're out and about. They just pay a very high rate for the person to come to their home. Is there any jurisdiction or enforcement, or does it matter?
I think you're going to be splitting hairs when it comes to trying to define the medical. We do have that carve out though, right?
Right.
We do have so there is the carve out in our statute for it's supposed to be for people who are homebound or bedbound to get services. But it's this. Yeah, it's the same thing with service dogs now these days. If you pay a doctor enough money, you can take that dog anywhere, right? Don't ask.
At no charge on an airplane, right next to somebody trying to eat food.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just one of those things where it's when it starts to violate HIPAA, which is the privacy of medical issues. You can't really start delving down that rabbit hole with the person, or else because they can just throw HIPAA at you and say, "Don't ask me about my medical conditions because I'm not required to disclose them to you." So, like I said, it becomes splitting hair at that point, where someone who has affluence can maybe talk to their doctor and get some kind of medical clearance to have that done. But as it stands, if the only carve out we have in that statute is for the medical issues, but I mean, like I said, it's one of those.
So if you're a celebrity in the greater LA area and you have an electrologist come into your home and you're out and about, you are entitled to somehow have a medical.
And that's between them and their doctor. It's not between us.
Okay.
It's I mean, if that's the carve out that we have in the statute is for medical is the medical statute where, and the intention behind that was for someone who's basically homebound or bedbound, and and being able to provide them services. How people on the periphery want to deal with that and play with that's up to them.
If there's a particular concern, I would recommend that you file a complaint. If you're aware of a particular situation, then you can file a complaint, and it can kind of work its way through the enforcement process. But this agenda item, I think we need to focus on the personal services permit and kind of the impact that electrology would have.
Yeah,
maybe
so
the practice of that in the context of the personal service.
My question to you is, if the personal service, as an electrologist, if the personal service permit were to continue, how would you think that would be a service that people could offer at home, or do you think it needs to be done within the confines of a establishment?
Me personally,
Yeah, Matt.
if everything is marked, your tweezers are in a bag
Uh-huh.
that show as proof that it's been in a sterilizer, and all your products are properly labeled, new cotton, new gauze, you can take your machine and your little suitcase with everything properly labeled. I mean, I have seen on websites that there are home services available.
So may I say something?
Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to make it clear that we don't recognize the word sterilize. Everything has to be disinfected. Sterilizing is not disinfected.
No, not for electrology.
Not for electrology? Excuse
There's a
me.
difference in electrology between disinfectant and sterilizing. Disinfectant is, as I understand it, is a chemical solution.
Forgive me, I was wrong.
And sterilizing means it needs to be either in a dry heat sterilizer or an autoclave, and it would have the tape, the medical little label that I was speaking of,
Okay.
that changes color from a certain temperature. And the new rules are it has to have a date, and if there's more than one person in the office, the person's initials who sterilized it.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I thank you for your feedback for the questions I asked. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Ron Chamberlain. I own 11 Sport Clips here in our fine state of California. And I'll be real brief. You know, the mission that you started out with is health, public health and safety. I think we need to remember that. When Fred gave you that out, May, what does that mean? I think you need to really go back and write up something and explain health and safety wise, this is an impossibility to be able to regulate and to be able to inspect. Now, with that said, if you choose to move forward, then you need to make sure that they've got adequate insurance, not $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, but an acceptable limit that you would have for any other type of professional services. Licenses. Well, I would start smaller, just like was earlier mentioned. That was a good idea. Don't include all of the different classifications. Go with a narrow scope so that you can see whether or not you're going to have any additional problems that need to be addressed in the future. And these are mobile licenses, right? So have them come to you once a year to do the inspections. That's going to deter a lot of them from moving forward. And also when they don't show up for the appointment that you have for them, you take away their license. That's all I've got. You've got a tough job. They didn't give you an easy one on this one.
Thank you for the comment.
Hi there, I'm Wendy Jacobs. I'm the founder of the Facebook group that's been discussed a couple times. I'm a licensed esthetician and a permanent makeup artist here in California. We have about 1,500 members in our group, depending on tempers. And so we go back and forth from about 1,475 to 1,500 people. So we're actually a really active group, and we really appreciate everything that you all do for us, especially Tammy in our conversations with helping us out with strange questions in the middle of the night. So anyways, on to the PSP. I think that based on conversations and feedback that I've discussed with our members and asked personally in the forum, privately offside of the forum, everything else like that. I was the one public member that was at the Riverside that wasn't a college student. So I feel that this is an opportunity for us to become an elite service member, to show and to prove to you and to the public that we are people that really care about consumer safety. Unfortunately, with the advent of what's going on with 1513, a lot of people are being pushed out of their salons. And that's because salon owners are now in a situation where they have to pay us for our sit time. And so where we could have had a 10 a.m., lash appointment and then a 5 o'clock facial, we're still kind of not going to be paid in between that. And they're all very, very afraid right now to go to the labor board, because then that puts a big scarlet letter on their chest that they will never get a job in a salon in their area ever again because of this whole 1513 thing. My general thought on this, again, with being the elite of the BBC, being able to represent ourselves in the public, is that we are held to a much higher standard, that we are bloodborne pathogen certified, that we are LifeScan certified, that we are certified through organizations such as ASCP or other professional organizations that mean something to our industry. We are kind of in a catchy situation in California that we don't have a continuing education certification process here that is regulated or monitored or means anything to anyone. I could write up a certificate right now and tell you all that you're the best lash artist on the planet, and it means nothing. But having something that would add to our credibility as somebody who actively goes out and seeks education, consumer safety, and advanced movement in our industry as estheticians and knowledge, I think that would be something that would add to our legitimacy as a service provider in the public. I do not believe, because I do have a lot of conversations with other lash artists across the country and people that are trying to make lash artists a legitimate part of any sort of licensure, whether you believe it's happening or you believe that it's also being done by a lot of housewives right now out of their homes for very cheap rates without training. I believe that this is a situation where we need to not tie this to a brick and mortar. I think that it's not practical. Unfortunately, I think that we all need to be personally responsible for the services that we provide. And I think also because of the what's going on with 1513, we're all being driven out to be independent contractors and probably not always in a salon situation. As Fred brought up before, we have this whole booth rental thing. Whether we're all legitimate as booth renters or just some gal that shows up and does facials at a salon and hopes that their relationship is strong enough with the salon owner to be paid for that sit time and be legitimate employees, that's not happening right now. So I really do believe that this is an opportunity for us to take this PSP, turn it into an elite situation that makes us more liable to the public and to yourselves as a board, and also to take that responsibility on ourselves to be the best that we can and represent our talents and to be able to make money, to be very honest. A lot of us, as single moms, single parents, single entrepreneurs and business owners, we are being affected by what's happening with the labor laws, especially in California. And we are also restricted quite a lot with some of the services that we can provide legally, and that's driving everybody underground. A large amount of it I'm seeing and hearing about is in the lash industry, and that's a shame. When you mentioned rolling out individual test licenses for this PSP, you're looking at 2 years for a rollout for maybe a nail tech test. Well, what's going to happen with the lashing industry? Is it's just going to go farther into people's private homes, and we know that you guys can't knock on a door and say, hey, we'd like to know what's going on in there. So that's kind of some of the perspective that I have. Again, if my group can help with providing, because we do not have representation of an esthetician on your board, if my group can help, I'm sure Tammy will reach out to us and we will put up individual surveys in our group and hopefully we can get some participation. But thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other public comment?
If I may just respond to one of the issues, I think the big issue obviously is whether or not the PSP is required. And I think I read the first sentence of the statute earlier, but I think I'd like to read you the second sentence of the statute, which may address it more. The sentence I read you earlier is that the board shall issue regulations regarding a personal service permit. And the next sentence is, in establishing the regulations, the board shall hold at a minimum 2 stakeholder meetings. So the stakeholder meetings aren't independent of the regulations, they were part and parcel of the regulations. And I think that kind of emphasizes the statutory interpretation that our office is
Okay.
offering.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I
I
have
actually
the,
have a comment.
please.
I take to heart everything that's said by our public members, our public that comes, and especially regarding the brick and mortar. I see more and more brick and mortar businesses going out of business, and that concerns me on many levels. And one of those levels is those are the people that volunteer for the Police Activity League games, to coach. They're the people that do all of the volunteer work in most communities. And because of digitalization and many other issues, we're losing those folks. Competition from major companies. So we need to do what we can to preserve brick and mortar, not only for health and safety, but also for the community in general. And so that's where I'm going to be headed.
So as seen as there's no more public comment on this issue, we have the motion. And once again, I'm just going to reiterate the motion, which is to move this conversation basically to our licensing and examination committee at a hearing that is yet to be set, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I'm going to call for the vote, and I'm going to start with Coco on my left-hand side.
Coco, yes.
Lisa, yes.
Joseph Federico, yes.
Dr. Carrie Williams, yes.
Rich Hedges, yes.
Andrew Drapkin, yes.
Polly Cardenas, yes.
Mary Lou Amaro, yes.
Okay. Motion passes, and I think we're going to take a 5-minute break. So, good job, everybody, for the first part of this. Call the meeting back to order. So, welcome back, everybody. For those following along with us, I think we are now moved on to agenda item number 10, which is the update and discussions of proposed bills that could impact our board. So many of these laws we've already made motion, or we've already taken a position on. And so we're just going to kind of reiterate some of those and see if we need to update our position. So at this time, I am going to defer over to Christy Underwood. Right?
Yes.
Making sure. You all ready to go?
I'm ready.
Sorry, I apologize.
So the first bill is AB 1322. This is a bill that the board saw quite some time ago, and it was a 2-year bill, and we did not think this bill was moving, but it did have some movement recently, so we're bringing it back to the board. October 19th, 2015, the board took a position of oppose on it. So the bill is back before you to decide if you want to continue or take a new position. One of the things that we were actually just discussing is the bill it's not in our laws. It is in the law section for alcohol beverage control.
I asked a question, Kristen.
Uh-huh.
So at one point, we were going to have to, our inspectors were going to have some role in controlling this. Is that still the case?
We don't think so because it's really their law. We would not be able to enforce their law.
And there's nothing our inspectors have to check for?
Correct. However, it does say that the license of the establishment providing the beauty services is in good standing, so we would probably want to define what good standing would be.
Okay, so there's been a change in the law then, because at one point we really believed that we were going to have to enforce some of this.
Well, I can tell you that when I saw this hearing that took place a year ago, it was the intent at that time that they wanted our inspectors because we were already there. That was the discussion that was held at the committee hearing.
Yeah, well, that got us in trouble in Southern California with the county sheriff's
Right.
office too, because we were already there.
But it is not in our law, so.
As a point of just clarification for myself, when I'm looking at like the assembly bill, like how can I quickly delineate what the changes are from the last time I saw it? It's the blue and the red, right?
Yep. So they changed from beer or wine to
wine
wine or beer,
And they
which
changed-
significantly changes it to me.
Yeah.
And I think we should reevaluate our position just based on that change.
I was
Actually,
like,
there's one more change.
okay.
That sounds like the wine
Yeah, the
industry was
authors.
involved in this.
What was the other change?
I'm sorry. It's been moving it a little bit. So number two is also new where it's saying that the bill does not limit the authority of the city or city and county to restrict or limit the consumption of alcoholic beverages. On the analysis part, number two.
Oh, okay.
So, and this is gonna exempt them from having an alcohol license.
Right.
Okay. So currently the board holds the position of oppose on this. So, I mean, at this time, I'm gonna ask my board, does anybody want to update our position on this and have put forth?
Since I voted to support, take a position of support last time, I would like us to.
No, we had,
The board had a position to oppose this
okay.
bill.
Okay.
On that vote, I voted
But
against
no,
that
okay.
position.
Apologize, I just.
I think that
Yeah, I
I
remember
think
that.
I
Yes.
got that clear. I'm just the only problem is we know it already happens. If they're going to make it legal, technically, it might be better, and that way there be. If we're not required to enforce ourselves, and I think that was the main issue that during the discussion is that who would be the enforcers of this. I see we might as well not make salon people automatically breaking the law by providing the service which we know they do already. It's almost like, yes, I know the speed limit's 55, but who goes 55? Might as well raise it up to something. Not quite the
It's actually
same,
state
but
law that requires that.
it's not quite the same. But I'm just
Okay.
saying that's why I think we should change our position.
To just a straight up support?
Yes.
Let me ask a question of Christy. So, based on what you said, it seems to me that your feelings changed on how we would be involved in this. That's key to me, because I don't want our inspectors involved in policing this.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly can address that a little bit. So because this is part of the laws that alcohol and beverage control regulates, I think it would fall to them to enforce it. Now that doesn't mean that if you had an inspector in the establishment who observed it, that they wouldn't be a witness. Does that make sense? So, I mean, they wouldn't be expected to say, "Hey, you served." You know, you're in violation of BMP 23,399.5 because you served that person 2 glasses of wine or something like that.
Well, I certainly, in that case, I'm not opposed to the bill, but I'm not in favor of it either. Because I'm a teetotaler personally, and so I would make a motion that we change our position on this to neutral.
I would say there is still the issue that Christy raised, which is that the establishment license has to be in good standing
That's fine. It has to be
with
a
the
good
board.
standing.
The challenge is that ABC may ask the board what's good standing.
Yeah, we still have to define what good
So.
standing is.
So does that mean no citations or does it mean no discipline? I mean, it's
I think.
it could be up to them to decide.
Yeah, we just give them the
and then
information. They decide what
they
good
decide.
standing is.
Yeah.
So that's my motion. If I can get a second, we vote on it.
So I have one motion. Excuse me. I just want to reiterate. I have Andrew's motion, which is to support the bill, and then I have Richard's motion, which is just a neutral, correct? And neither of those have a second. Is there
So it looks like we both will go down in flames.
So there's no second on either of those. Then is there any more motions on this, or do we just want to hold with the current, which is oppose?
Well, based on that, I'll make a motion to continue based on the lack of enthusiasm or my motion.
Do we need that motion?
Well, I guess I would like a little bit more understanding as far. I know again, I recall our last conversation about the enforcement. So with this bill, who's enforcing it? ABC.
ABC.
And-
I mean because the provision is within.
And what would
the
our involvement be? I guess I'm just trying to.
There, according to the text of the law, there is no obligation on the inspector to take action.
Mr. President, I know it's not time for public
Please,
comments, but I'm
go ahead.
wondering if I could weigh in. I've
Please.
been following this bill closely. My association, the PBFC, is vigorously neutral.
So would you second my motion?
I have to say personally, I've got qualms, concerns. So this bill flew out of the assembly, I think it was 68-0, and then hit a brick wall last spring in the Senate Governmental Organization Affairs Committee. And the reason was Senator Hernandez from the Inland Empire said, okay, this bill expressly exempts the consumption of alcohol from ABC's license requirements, and therefore basically from ABC's regulatory oversight. Staff said, yes, that's correct. It caused serious pause of the Senate GO committee members, who, by the way, largely support the alcohol industry, almost blank check support the alcohol industry. So the chair was in support of the bill before that discussion, and then went neutral and suggested to the author he ought to hold the bill over. That was the final hearing last year before the committee deadline, so the bill became a 2-year bill. The author chose not to change or alter or address the state oversight issue. Instead, he offered the last paragraph of the bill, which was an amendment that, in my legal opinion, just reiterates existing law vis-a-vis local governance and their ability to set, for example, undue concentration levels in zoning ordinances, but not specifically granting local municipalities, be they cities or counties, any extra authority to monitor the consumption of alcohol. So the question of who at the state level will be responsible, I think if there is any state agency left, it remains your board. And that's a concern. And I think that's why the bill expressly references your state board. Granted, it's just as it relates to their licensing standing. But the conversation was clear in the Senate GO committee last spring. And Senator Hernandez's question was, so you're telling me the State Board of Barbering and Cosmetology is going to be the only state agency in charge of monitoring alcohol consumption in these 45,000 licensed establishments? And the answer was, yeah, that's it. Because the purpose of this bill is to exempt ABC oversight of alcohol consumption so long as it's not sold and just given complimentary as part of a beauty service in a state board licensed establishment. Now, this has happened for time immemorial. If you come into a barbershop early, hey, grab a cold one while you wait. Or if you're in a real high-end day spa, would you like a Chardonnay during your 3-hour stay with us? In my personal opinion, it falls under the let sleeping dogs lay theory. Yes, we know that happens. ABC has known that has happened forever. But ABC has, the Alcohol Beverage Control Department, which is in charge, which by the way has sworn legal officers that carry guns and badges, which is another big distinction between their ability to license and regulate this compared to your inspectors that are not sworn officers, that do not carry guns, etc. However, ABC was willing to look the other way because it wasn't a central part of the business model of these day spas and barbershops. However, in recent years, not decades, but literally just recent years, there are a couple of predominantly male-oriented salon chains in which the menu of their service says you will get a Jimmy Beam haircut. It's in their menu of service. So their business model is based on alcohol consumption with beauty services. To me, that kicks over the sleeping dogs. And rather than acknowledge that was probably a step too far, they went to the legislature to ask for a blanket exemption from ABC because ABC decided at that point we have to act. We were willing to look the other way all these many years because it was tangential, tertiary at best. This now becomes a central business model. So ABC cracked down on those two chains, and that's when they went and got Assemblymember Daley to introduce AB 1322. So long-winded way of saying I do have some concerns, but from a salon perspective, if you're going to start providing as a part of your business model alcohol consumption, there are all sorts of liabilities that flow with that. And in fact, the state is in the process this year of passing AB 2121 by Lorena Gonzalez from San Diego that would require all bartenders to pass a mandatory ABC certified instruction class. Even nonprofits that have a single event in which they have a hosted bar. So this is kind of flying against those trends, and what it could mean for this board, I'm not sure. All of those reasons, if you put them in the mix, the cocktail here, I can understand and appreciate at a personal level why you had an opposed position to begin with. Thank you.
Thank you. Any, okay. So
I have a question.
please.
So if they're allowed to serve alcohol, is there going to be a certain time frame that they're able to serve this alcohol? Are children going to be
No later than
in
10
the
p.m.
Related to 10
so children can be in the salon and they're serving alcohol and so be it.
Yeah, and ABC won't be there to check to see if minors are getting alcohol. That's another good point.
Yeah. I mean,
Well,
just bringing that
I'm
up.
gonna
Well,
go
Can I
ahead.
just ask, maybe, I mean, I don't think we're going to be changing our positions,
No.
but
It's obvious to me.
I'm just wondering practically, can an establishment get a license from ABC?
Yes,
Yes.
there's actually
Oh,
a few
salons
salons that are salon slash
Excellent
bars.
point.
Yes.
But are they separate? So therefore, it's like a separate.
No, they can
no.
serve alcohol like
Yeah.
but you pay for the
The
alcohol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like a regular bar.
It's a
that-
bar.
Because
yeah.
I
I've been
thought I
to
read
salons
somewhere
that way,
that like ABC is limited on how many licenses it can give out within a certain
Mm-hmm.
time frame, or area or zone. So I'm wondering if it's practical for a salon to be able to get a license if there's a bunch of bars in the area too. I mean, but I guess I'm on the wrong board for that. So
And going back to being it's a consumer, we're trying to protect
Mm-hmm.
safety, blah, blah, blah. I just, personally look at it being in the industry and people serving alcohol and I just don't think it's a good idea.
I
And
understand.
that's my personal opinion.
As seen.
I have a question.
Oh, please.
If you don't mind, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask a question of Mr. Jones,
Please.
if he'd come back to the podium.
I was gonna say as if Mr. Jones is willing to answer the question.
I've never seen him
A microphone, Fred Jones? Need ask?
So
Never ask a lawyer that.
to beleaguer a tired phrase from the 70s, follow the money.
Mm-hmm.
Is the industry, the part of the industry that's actually have these issues in their menu, alcohol being served, are they pushing this legislation? Do you have any knowledge of that?
Yeah, Dry Bar is the official sponsor of the bill.
So then this might be just an attempt to get around having to get an alcoholic beverage license?
Yes.
Intent beside the point, this bill is a means of exempting ABC oversight.
I get your point.
As it relates to alcohol consumption, there are some limits. It's supposed to be 7 ounces or something like that. But nobody's going to
12
be
ounces
there.
of beer
12 ounces.
12
So you
ounces.
can't give him a
do the
16
Jimmy
or a
Beam.
tall boy. It has to be a 12 ouncer.
And you can't do the Jim Beam.
But again, the
6
only
ounces of
state
wine.
agent,
Yeah.
the only state agent that will possibly be a percipient witness of this would be your inspectors, because this exempts them from ABC oversight.
Based on whether I get a second or not, based on what I've heard, I'm withdrawing my motion.
Okay. So I'm gonna say as it seems that I've had two motions somewhat fail, and we currently already have a position of oppose, which doesn't seem far off from what the consensus that I'm hearing around here. I'm just gonna say let's move along.
I'll second that.
Okay. Our next bill is AB 2025. The board previously had a position of support if amended on this bill. What we had asked for an amendment on is this is the bill that is addressing labor concerns with our establishment application. And the prior version of the bill had us developing a list of questions to add to the application, and we had asked that that be removed and instead just have an acknowledgement. That has been removed. It is just an acknowledgement now. So they did work with us and amended that section. There are several other amendments that took place on this bill. They did include, they expanded the scope of the Health and Safety Advisory Committee, the committee that we talked about earlier, to actually include some labor discussion. The committee's already doing that because we felt it was already, a good idea to talk about the health and safety, not only of our licensees, but also of not only of our consumers, but also of our licensees. So that's being put into statute that the advisory committee should also look at labor issues. Also, the health and safety advisory curriculum that we are currently revising right now, that is one of the reasons why I mentioned earlier that the Education and Outreach Committee is going to be meeting soon, because we will have that curriculum ready to present to that committee first and then ultimately to the board. And we had already included a module in that curriculum for labor, workers' rights, labor laws. So that is now put in here as well. And I believe is that the one, instead of the questions, it does say that the applicant shall include a signed acknowledgement that the applicant understands his or her rights as a licensee as outlined in the informational materials. So there is the question, and this was brought up in the committee discussions as well, as the word understand is how do you make sure that somebody actually is understanding what they're reading? So that is a question as well.
And actually, I'm new to this, but just in my cold reading of this bill, I have a little bit of a concern about having an application that says, do you understand? Because what happens if they say no? The board would be put in the position of licensing someone who doesn't understand, or kind of if they took that position, then that they wouldn't license someone who checked the box and said, no, I don't understand, then you're forcing everybody basically to check the yes box, I understand, as opposed to just sort of traditionally sort of an acknowledgement, right, that they've received certain information, which is usually how, a notice or just be aware of, did you receive a copy of, I'm sure those of you who have earthquake insurance, I know I get that notice every year. Did you receive a copy of your rights to have earthquake insurance?
So my question is, as we took the position support if amended, then they amended it. Did they overcorrect so much that now we're back to, you know what I'm saying?
Well, this went through the Senate Business and Professions Committee, and that's where that's where it was amended. And so there was a lot of discussion, and that's where they came up with a lot of the additional amendments.
So the thing that seems to be most problematic is this understanding clause, and it's in that it has to be I understand, or you can't take like they can't take like a cue from like Apple by accepting the terms and conditions.
Right, or acknowledging receipt. I do have one other concern, but again, this is a cold reading and not being familiar. So in this area, unfortunately, without your regular counsel here, I may not be grasping the full range of it, but I'll get to that in a moment. But with regard to the issue about the understand, it's section 5 of the draft. It's on page 3, the bottom, and it would amend 74 7347. And it says the application shall include a signed acknowledgement that the applicant understands that establishments are responsible for compliance with any applicable labor laws of the state. That one is not so concerning, just because I think that's basic, but the second part is more concerning. And that the applicant understands the informational materials based on basic labor laws as specified in 7314.3. The applicant is provided by the board with the application. So it's a little awkward, but basically they're saying that whatever the health and safety committee comes up with, that they understand those, is how I read this. And that actually works into my other concern, and that is that some of the way that the amendments to 7314.3 are, which is the Health and Safety Advisory Committee provision, I'm a little unclear whether or not the board would be developing these documents and would be required to give legal advice, and that's where I'm coming from, and that's where my discomfort is coming from. I know that later on the agenda you have another bill that had some similar language, but that language said, that the board would review materials provided and could basically, forward it from somebody else. This says that the committee is going to, in addition to what it already does, it will make recommendations on the health and safety issues before the board that impact licensees, including how to ensure licensees are aware of basic labor laws. Basic labor laws include, but not limited to, key differences between the legal rights, benefits, and obligations of an employee and an independent contractor. There are law firms dedicated to that whole area of law. It's not a simple black and white, and I certainly wouldn't. I don't know a lot about today's business models or what the issues are, and this may be something that, from your perspective or from Rebecca's perspective, it's not an issue. I just see it as a potential concern. And the next one is wage and hour rights for hourly employees. Again, that's an area of law that there's whole treatises on. And then the third one is anti-discrimination laws relating to the use of particular language in the workplace. And I don't have familiarity with that issue either, enough to know whether or not that's so clear cut. The sub D, anti-retaliation laws regarding a worker's right to file complaints. I think that one is pretty clear. I'm not terribly concerned about that. Or how to obtain more information about state and federal labor laws. That seems pretty straightforward as well. So those items don't concern me, but that was one of the things that leapt out at me.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. So I'm a little unclear. So people have to check that they understand all of these issues.
Well, so if I'm understanding this law correctly, the establishment, yes, that 7337 requires the signed acknowledgement that the applicant understands, and this is for an individual license, so somebody performing cosmetology or barbering services or subsets thereof. So that you understand his or her rights as a licensee, as outlined in the informational materials on basic labor laws as specified in 7314, that the applicant is provided by the board with the application. So it's a little clunky, but I think the impression that I have is that the Health and Safety Committee would be charged with coming up with this informational packet related to those 5 subsections, the key differences between legal rights, benefits, and obligations of an employee and an independent contractor, wage and hour rights for the hourly employees, C, anti-discrimination laws relating to the use of particular language in the workplace, and then D, anti-retaliation laws relating to workers' rights to file complaints with Department of Industrial Relations, and E, how to obtain more information. So those 5 areas, the Health and Safety Committee would be developing information to provide to either individual licensees or licensed establishments. And then in order to complete your application, you have to answer the question whether or not you understand that material that's been provided to you.
Let me just give you an example. An attorney named David Rosenfeld with the Weinberg firm writes a comprehensive book. It's probably about 200 pages every year with individuals' rights under the labor code. Do you know what donning and doffing is?
I do.
Yeah, well, how many people know that? That's part of the rights they have to know.
but yeah.
So
Right.
I'm beginning to have more problems with this based on your conversation with you than I had in the beginning.
Yeah, I'm having a harder time just understanding the legislation, let alone someone who has to understand.
There's
all
a reason
of
that
the ins and outs of
Roosevelt
labor law.
rewrites this book every year. Many of these rules and codes under the Department of Labor change based on court decisions.
That's one of my concerns, but
Yeah.
again, I don't know specific to your industry what it is. I have concerns about how, if you were my client, I would advise the Health and Safety Advisory Committee on what to put out, and that's why I'm raising
Well,
it.
give you an
So-
example. If a salon has a uniform that people have to wear, and they're required to wear that, then they have to pay, and they require them that they have to be ready to work the minute they get their time starts. They have to then pay them for the time previous to the time they start for donning and doffing these uniforms. It's, people aren't going to understand that kind of stuff, but it's their right.
Yeah.
It usually takes a lawyer getting involved in something like this for the people to begin to understand their rights. I'm beginning to get really cold on this based on our conversation today.
And I also want to be a little bit thoughtful because I understand that you're making some efforts in this vein already, and I'm not saying that the Health and Safety Committee couldn't do that or maybe republish materials that are provided by, for example, the Labor Commissioner. They issue opinions or guidances frequently, or sometimes letters to individuals that could be shared. But I think I just want it to be really clear that the Health and Safety Committee of this board isn't the one who's making those determinations, because there are other agencies.
The Labor Commissioner's Office right now has
do
a
that.
program that's really far out there compared to any other program. Withholding wages is wage theft. They actually have pamphlets on it. They call it wage theft. So the Department of Labor is really doing a lot of community outreach. They've been at some of the county fairs.
So I have a couple of questions related to that. My first question being, I know that this is not an issue specific to the barbering and cosmetology industry. I'm sure that there are issues with other industries as well. And my question would be, how have they handled this situation? Are they also required, such as the restaurant industry or whatever, to also have these types of requirements? And I'm wondering, what does for instance, the Labor Commission have in place in working with small businesses? Because I'm wondering why it's becoming incumbent on us to provide all of this information. And the other piece of this section specific to the Health and Safety Advisory Committee, I'm unclear about whether or not that committee is permanent. And if that's the case, if it's being written into legislation, how does that work? My understanding was that the Health and Safety Advisory Committee was created because of a sunset review, and we were asked to create this to address issues. So if we are then becoming written into legislation, how does that work in the future if we no longer need to exist?
So the committee is in statute already.
Okay.
So it's a permanent committee unless repealed. So unless it's taken out of statute, that committee will stay.
Okay.
And as for kind of why this is all happening is it goes back to what happened in New York in nail salons. And there are several legislatures who held an informational hearing several months ago to talk about what happened in New York, which was labor trafficking, all types of violations. People weren't getting paid for their services, unclean environments that individuals were working in. So the legislature basically thought we are the ones who reach these licensees on a daily basis, more commonly. And so that's why we have several bills for our board, because normally we look at 2 if we, at the most. And so I think we have 4 specifically relating back to nail salons. So that's where it's all coming from, and why it's kind of landing with us, because we're the ones who are inspecting the salons. We're the ones who have notifications to the salons with the renewal notices. We can add information to renewal notices, and we can add information up front on applications. So that's how we're getting the responsibility, in a sense.
Okay, because it just seems like basic small business practice that all small businesses that operate should have some type of requirement that has an understanding of labor laws, and I'm just curious, does this exist for other industries?
I don't believe it does. Do you know? Fred might know. But
The Department of Labor requires postings of employees'
Right.
rights based on the industry in the break areas of every employer in the
Right.
Labor law posters.
right. But I don't know that any other industry has gone at this far. I think we are probably one of the first boards that would be doing this, at least from our department's standpoint. I'm not aware of another board that. Do you know off the top of your head? I don't.
There are you might see other regulatory bodies that might require acknowledgement of receipt. Did you receive something? But this, for purposes of this is.
So would this be precedent setting?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Joe, can I ask a quick question?
Please.
Just for clarity's sake, is this the same bill that last time we were discussing? It was suggested that we might want to focus our amendment because the author might not have been too accommodating to all of our other. It's like, I think mine was about the languages, and it was suggested to stand down because it might distract from what we actually need to get done in that bill. Is that this bill?
Yeah, I believe so.
And did we get what we wanted?
We did, and then they kind of.
And
It
then
seems
some.
like they kind of overcorrected a little bit too much, so it's kind of now we're back to the same point where we're still having issues with the bill.
So, Chris, you
But do we have an issue where, are we still in the sense that we don't want to, for lack of a poke the snake, if for lack of a better term, we got what we wanted, so leave it alone, or do we want to open up Pandora's box and try to correct another, the other way?
Through the president. So what specifically you requested in your amendment was the earlier version, the immediate version before what you're looking at today, actually proposed having a mini exam that they would actually have to answer questions that you would have to develop in consultation with Department of Industrial Relations. That was a huge concern. Psychometricians, everybody else would have had a field day with, well, is this basically tantamount to a licensing exam, and what happens if they fail it? And so that caused you guys and your staff and your permanent legal counsel, but with all due respect, everything you said, I'm tracking with, believe me.
I preface this with it's my cold read. So.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that was exactly what you guys decided to focus like a laser beam on, because that was an unworkable, untenable position. We'll say the author is very motivated. She sits on the labor committee. This is a very important issue. She has a very good relationship with labor unions. She has said on more than one public hearing of this bill that this is rather, my words, but it's appropriate characterization, this is a rather tepid bill for her. She would rather go a lot stronger, a lot further on the labor concerns. So this is a compromise on her part. And by the way, this being the prior iteration. And then you all came along and said, I grant you that, but we've got this problem with this mini exam that you're proposing that we give. And so in good faith, she took the amendment to take out the exam questions again, my words, exam questions, but it said a list of questions developed by DIR, a roundabout way to the acknowledgement. And so you're right, Mr. President. Now the language of the acknowledgement, at least as it relates to the establishment owner, the one for the personal licensee, it's okay. It's just basically a general acknowledgement. But then they added these extra phrases in there for the establishment owner.
It's the same.
It's both.
Oh, it is on
actually.
both? Okay.
Yeah, there's a two-part acknowledgement and understand it.
And
Yeah.
understand. So, yes, I have kind of two answers for you. Everything staff council has said are legal concerns. Absolutely. But the practical side of this, the political side of it is, you've got an author who has made compromise, who could, under ordinary circumstances, be requiring you to do a heck of a lot more on this front, and has taken the one amendment request that you made. And I'm old school. If you ask for an amendment and you get it, you're kind of duty bound to at least not oppose the bill. And then again, on the practical side of it, there are still other state agencies that are just as responsible, and they will continue to be just as responsible for labor practices and everything listed on here. The intent behind it is to have one extra layer. I think your executive officer did a good job explaining. It's your board that has the most interaction with these folks. And that's why the legislature, in all candor, is looking for a quick fix. And so their quick fix is to put the burden on you. To hell with what your major mission is, which is to protect consumers, not business and labor practices. So this is a legislative sausage mill compromise that was much worse than what it is now. And is there going to be someone who decides not to check that acknowledgement box and then legally challenge the denial of their license? Boy, I can't anticipate that from a practical vantage point. But I just wanted to answer the direct question. You asked for an amendment to remove the questions. The author agreed to that and came to an acknowledgement signature only. And so that's where you're at.
Can we take a position of support with suggestions?
That's another support with amendments, right?
Well, that's a little. I'm trying.
That's where we're at currently.
I'm kind of softening the amendment because I mean we're not, because I'm sort of old school too. You ask for something, you get what you ask for, and now we're gonna, it's like, yeah, you met my price. Now I want even another $200 off. I mean,
but
kind of like made an agreement, and now we're gonna back out of it. Why isn't the author gonna say, well, all right, let's just put back in my exam? That's why I was trying to. Suggestions was a way of softening. I mean, I know that we probably don't have an official support with suggestions, but that's why I was kind of wondering if there is a middle ground between.
So, I've got a suggestion. Actually, all of these signers on are labor supported people. I know them all. So here's what I would suggest. I think it's going to create a lot of work for us, and I think based on what I heard from the public and my knowledge of how strongly you can be punished, I think we should change to a neutral stance on it. And I would get advice from the executive officer on that position.
So
she has to deal with it.
Instead of moving to the left, you're saying move to the right, take a step back and go neutral? We were at a supportive amended, they amended it, now we're going to say, well, we're not going to take a position on it at all?
I actually don't have a problem supporting the bill.
You don't? Okay.
No. I just wanted to be clear on what saying yes meant. And knowing that this doesn't exist for other industries, I wanted to be clear that if we say yes to this, then we would probably be the first ones to do so. I think the intention of the bill, I'm totally on board with. I was just curious to know why other small business owners in other industries don't have that kind of requirement, because it would seem to be a basic requirement to become a small business owner. So that was the reason I had questions. I have no problem actually motioning to support the bill.
I still have some more questions though, and I may get there too.
Sure.
So if somebody doesn't check the box, then we're going to deny their license?
No, I think it would be an incomplete application.
Yeah, well, here's how,
So then you're not denying their license. It's just you need to reapply for your license and this time check the box.
We would send them a letter saying you forgot to check the box.
years and years of being on the DRC, I know that when people turn in incomplete applications, they often think they and sent their money in, they start working.
Mm-hmm.
And then we fine them $1,000 for being unlicensed. And if they're smart enough or understand the system enough to appeal it, we often give them relief because we know they didn't understand that they hadn't completed everything. But so this is just one more step to in an industry where people already are getting fined to find another reason to fine them. And that's I guess is troubling to me.
Well, I mean, it will catch the ones who are savvy enough to appeal the fine. They come appear before DRC. You have an opportunity to explain to them so they understand the labor laws, so they know they can check. I mean,
Yeah, and I mean,
it gives you an educational opportunity.
And during DRC, you do have that citation history. You do have that citation history, so that I mean, you can see that if this is like someone who is just gaming the system and knows, they're just trying to get by, or if they legitimately just forgot to check the box.
But I mean, the other question I think still is they have to check a box. It doesn't say what happens if they check the no box. So the question that you have to ask shall include an acknowledgement that you understand. Check. No, I don't understand. Does the license get granted, regardless of that?
Would
no?
that be on us to figure out, or so that would?
It's your application, your law that's
But
being
we could
amended
grant and send the, for lack of a better term, an information pamphlet to try to explain it better. If they're saying, no, I don't understand it, well, here's more materials to help you understand it. But here's your license, or reapply, or now send it to you, now understand, and let them check yes or no. I don't know. I mean, that's another step, but
I'm wondering if it has to be a yes or no. I think that in my discussions with the author's office,
it could be like an initial,
yeah, like what you had mentioned before, Joe. When you get the Apple agreement, you don't check. You
can check. You can. That's the beauty of the software. You can't proceed until you check yes.
So just so I understand, is the issue the word understand? I know it was mentioned earlier that we could just maybe adjust it to I acknowledge that I received the information. Can we just?
When I had talked to the author's office, we had wanted it to be, I acknowledge that I am to follow X, Y, and Z labor laws, and we can reference those labor laws, not explain those labor laws, not define those labor laws, just tell them the laws. Tell them even where to go find those laws. That we could do that very easily, and we would be their first line of contact. So that's why we thought this board would be a good step to get that information out. The word understand has been brought up in committee hearings, and it's because it's how are we certifying that they understand what they're.
I guess my point of view on this is that regardless of whether or not we have it as a requirement, these establishments would still be susceptible to the Labor Commission coming in and finding them or litigating, right? So regardless, they have to comply. It's just whether or not we want to make it clear to them that they need to understand what they should be complying with.
Right.
So is there a requirement that is there any, I'm wondering if we would have to forward information where people said they don't understand to the Industrial Relations Department?
I don't think so.
Mm-mm.
No. And I mean, your point is
That would actually be the natural progression of things if they required us to
And
do it.
And you're for
Right.
certain that it has to be a yes or no question.
Well, I
It
think
can't
that's
just be.
what
It
Chrissy
can't
was
just be
asking
a
me.
checkbox with an initial or something.
I think so. I think it could be a checkbox. I don't know that it. But the challenge here is that you're requiring that it be a complete application. So you're essentially forcing somebody to check a box in order to get their license, but that they're signing under penalty of perjury.
Right.
Whether or not they understand it.
So
You're saying it's a requirement that you say you understand it under penalty of perjury, whether or not you actually understand it, because otherwise you're not getting your license. So I think that's you could do it as simply a checkbox. I understand, and leave only one box. But I think that's it. It still puts the licensee in the awkward position of either agreeing without understanding, or, I don't know if it's a meaningless agreement.
To be blunt, though, I mean the burden is on them, and if they don't if I have a check, I mean, yes, if I don't agree to the terms of service that Apple offers on the phone, I don't get to use the phone, so I can always lie, but the burden is on me to make that decision. I mean, I think here if I want the license, I check. If I was conscientious, I'd go out and read.
There's a big.
Now I understand. I can check the box and move on. I mean,
I mean, in all of DCA agencies, we take that penalty of perjury statement very seriously, and we frequently deny applications not because of underlying convictions, but simply because the person lied on the application. I mean, our office, the legal office at DCA, who advises multiple agencies, considers that a significant issue. If honesty is a characteristic or a quality that's important, and lying on your application is significant, we treat it that way. So I think there's a big difference between terms of use, a checkbox versus an acknowledgement, and that's why I raised it. That doesn't mean you can't make a decision.
What if I think I understand, but I actually don't? I mean, am I in trouble that way?
I think my concern is that the board would then be putting a licensee in a difficult position of making that determination. I mean, from my perspective, I would rather see it be a checkbox, yes or no, with a no, and then you make a decision whether or not you're going to they answer the question. Maybe if you get the no checkbox, then you send them the additional information again or something like that. You have a procedure. But I'm a little uncomfortable, and I would defer to Rebecca on that, but I'm a little uncomfortable advising you to make understand not mean something here.
I have another question. We still are making people do a paper application on their initial application for an establishment license.
They can also apply online.
Okay, why can't we do this? When they come to check the box, if they check it no, a screen pops up and it says, read this and understand it before you move forward.
We can't do that.
We
Free system.
No.
Because all kinds of folks do that.
Yes.
Actually, when you take your test.
Is that a limitation of the Breeze system?
When you take your test here, on any of the things that we're required to take tests over, if you answer it wrong, it pops up and says, read this, dummy, and then answer again. So we can't do that. It's limited. That's actually too bad, because that would solve
We might
the
be able
problem.
to someday, but
Yeah.
right now.
Okay.
Can
I think
make
just one other
a-
issue, Andrew.
okay.
I think this actually puts, probably legally, if they don't understand and check that they do to get their license, and later the labor commissioner goes after them, that would actually be something they could come after us to see what they said and use in a hearing saying, well, we think you intended to violate the law because you said you understood it.
Oh, I think the labor department could do like a records request and get if they had a case.
So so they better understand it when they do it, because it could put them in jeopardy later.
But then again, it's like I say I understand women, but my wife may think completely different to like of my understanding. You know what I'm saying? There, it's what that person understands.
Yeah, but if you say you understand sexual harassment law and then you're charged with sexual harassment and that comes out later on, God help you.
Okay. So, please, Andrew.
I was going to make a motion, but I'm wondering if it needs to be made because I was going to suggest that we even though I'm old school and I would say we should move to a support position because they did what we asked.
Mm-hmm.
To a certain extent, what they did what we asked, but not completely what we wanted because we've now got this. Their solution has this flaw that we see. So maybe just maintain this support if amended position and just express to the author this is the board's concern, and if it's addressed prior to the next meeting, maybe we could do a change of position via email or conference call or something like that to let the author know we want to be on board, but there's this one nagging issue, and see if the author shares the concern.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't share a concern, then we can't,
Okay. Well, I'm going to call
our concern.
I have one more question.
Okay.
Christy, I want you to be very direct because you have to deal with this. I've already heard from one person I respect a great deal on this issue from the public.
Sorry.
And two people I respect a great deal. And now I want to hear from you. What would you prefer? Because I really respect your opinion.
I think that we should ask them to remove the words understands.
Then that's what we'll do.
Replace with?
I think it should be an acknowledgement only.
I don't know if we need to make a motion. We still have.
Yeah, we still have. So currently,
I think the intent of this bill is to get the information out, and I think we should be very happy to help them get the information out
and provide them resources to get that information.
Resources. We're happy to do that. We translate all our information. We can get that information out.
So at this time,
so what would you ask them to do? Okay. Let's be clear on what we're going to ask them to do.
Change the word.
Yeah, but and how do we want it changed?
Yes. Okay. So I think it would be amending sections 3 and 4 of the bill, which is 7337 and 7347, to modify the language that requires that the applicant understand the rights as outlined and understand the informational materials to say that they have received the informational materials.
So basically, they're going from understand to received.
Correct. So they acknowledge that they've been received, or if, yeah.
Okay. So, a couple quick questions. One is if we already have a support if amended position, do we need to make this do we need to actually call for a question on this? And like you do with those recommendations, right. We do need to call for the question with those recommendations.
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
If you don't want to make it.
Go ahead. I'll second it.
Okay. I make a motion that we maintain the position that we currently have with direct advisement to the author, asking them to change this from understand to received.
I'll second that.
Okay. So I got a motion and a second. I'm going to call for public comment on this.
Just quick reiteration. I have a feeling that your executive officer will be met with resistance from the author. So be nimble, be flexible, because from industry vantage point, this bill could have been a lot more onerous on you and on establishment owners and on individuals. It would have been my preference that you support the bill and then authorize your executive officer to do what she can to negotiate this last minute wordsmithing, to continue to be in the position of support if amended. I think is going to put her in a little bit of a tough bind, but it may give her extra leverage. I don't know. But I just want to say I've been at every hearing. I've had discussions with the author personally and her staff on this bill. And from that experience, I'm here to tell you she's not going to budge. And so the question becomes, not only is this an act of futility, but could you end up somewhat burning a bridge of a very good rapport that I perceive your executive officer has with this author, who, by the way, has recently been promoted to be the Appropriations Committee chairwoman, which means any bill that has any fiscal impact has to go through her committee. So she does have some significant political weight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a quick question? So does your opinion or sense that this will be met with resistance and we're just tilting at windmills?
Yeah, I don't think she's going to budge. So then the question becomes, will she see this as a personal affront? Because you asked for an amendment. She thinks she gave it to you. Granted, it came with some technical issues, problems, which I concede. But in the legislative sausage mill, where they don't really see beyond 30,000 feet above the air, I'm not sure she's going to take too kindly to this technical concern that you have. And in light of the fact there are other state agencies that enforce these laws, whether you do anything on this bill or not, kind of begs the whole question of why are you getting bogged down in this detail?
Thank you. Seeing as there's no more public comment, I'm going to call for a vote.
Can we just restate the motion, please?
Okay. The motion is to support if amended, and then, or excuse me. Go ahead. So the motion is that we're going to continue with our support if amended, and those amendments are basically to change the terminology from "I understand" to more of a reflection of
I've acknowledged and received.
acknowledged and received.
Acknowledged received.
Acknowledged receipt, and then also be able to provide them with resources if need to be. Okay, correct?
Yeah, there's about 8 million people that are under DCA license in the state.
Uh-huh.
So this is probably going to expand to other agencies.
Okay.
Rich, would you accept a friendly amendment that says support and request?
I don't think that's an official position we can take, is it?
I think the value of it is generally that if you give the support if amended, then you have your support is contingent upon the amendment. The problem with the support and request changes is that there's no incentive, or there's less incentive to do it. I mean, there's no list of these are the positions you can take on a bill. I think the question is really just how valuable a support and then request changes is.
So then,
I have another question. Christy, are you comfortable with this?
I would agree that we're going to get resistance, but
So you're comfortable in doing this? You can be straight up.
I'm comfortable doing whatever my board needs me to do.
I know. No, let's.
Would you recommend this board take this position?
Good question.
I would probably support the bill, and I would try to work with the author myself.
I remove my motion.
Can you remove it after it's already been seconded?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
the second would also need to agree.
Well, seeing that I was going to vote against it, so I'll withdraw.
All right. And then, such a congenial board. So friendly. Okay.
Everybody leaves.
So now
I will move that we change our position to on the bill officially to a support position.
I would like to make a friendly amendment to that, which is that Christy, once again, we go support, but she does take these concerns with us to the author. Okay.
I will accept that. Well, my motion hasn't seconded yet.
I'll second that. We got seconds and thirds.
All
All right.
I call the question.
So we got to go back to, since it's a new motion, I've got public comment. Seeing as there's no public comment, I will call for the vote. So I'm going to start with Mary Lou Amaro.
Mary Lou Amaro, yes.
Julie Cortines, yes.
Andrew Drafkin, yes.
Richard Hedges, yes.
Dr. Carrie Williams, yes.
Joseph Federico, yes.
Lisa Tong, yes.
Kokolashin, yes.
Motion passes. That's the second law of, I think, 6 that we have to go through. No. 4, 5.
They might get a little easier.
Yeah,
from
let's
now.
hope.
I'm
Let's
not sure,
hope.
though. Okay, our next bill is AB 2125, which our board currently has a position of oppose on. This is the Healthy Nail Recognition Program that has Department of Public Health. Is that right now it's the several counties have a healthy nail program, and this is expanding it on a voluntary basis statewide. We opposed this bill at our last meeting. We didn't like the name, healthy, because we have health and safety laws. And we also didn't like that there was no requirements in there regarding our own status, for instance, because we had found some salons on their current list of healthy nail salons that had violations. In fact, some with foot spas violations.
Some not licensed.
We did do another check recently, and they are all licensed now. So an amendment was made. I did talk to the author's office on this. The name is not going to change. So that is not an option. It's already branded. It's already out there in several counties. It's Healthy Nail Recognition Program. However, they did add to this bill that the State Board of Barbering and Cosmetology may notify the city, county, or city if a recognized salon is found in violation of Article 12 of the State Board of Barbering and Cosmetology regulations, and a violation shall result in the removal of the Healthy Nail Salon recognition from that
That's good
program.
move.
Okay. So currently we have an opposed position on
Correct.
this bill. Is there any discussion of this, or does anybody wish to make a call for a motion to change our current position?
I'd move to support it.
Straight up support?
Yes.
Okay, so I got a motion for support. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
We got a motion and a second. Call for public comment. I should just say call for Fred or
I
call
know,
for Fred
I'm
Jones.
sorry. I thought today I wasn't
Can't we
going to
just get him a
speak
nameplate?
much.
Yeah.
We're going to stop at letting you vote.
Thanks. Fred Jones for the record. So we're neutral on this bill. There are some other concerns that you haven't discussed today. They list the so-called toxic trio. Well, all three of these so-called toxic trio have been approved by FDA under appropriate usage. So from an industry vantage point, we're uncomfortable putting in statute something that's factually incorrect. And the author maintains a vigorous defense of that language. So we think that's unfortunate and precedent setting. Very bad precedent. The good part of it and the reason why we're neutral is it is a voluntary program.
Right.
However, it's a voluntary program that's largely going to be run by the Department of Public Health, not by the State Board of Barbering and Cosmetology. So the concern there is the whole turf concern. Who has more influence and involvement and, frankly, leadership over something like that than your board? And the author has admitted, even the last time I spoke with him, that he hasn't even spoken with the Department of Public Health. So it's just kind of odd. He's resisting shifting the primary responsibility over to your board. I understand, though, you focused on the concern about how can you be called a healthy nail if you're not even licensed with, or you're under a cloud with this state board, with your license. And so that has been expressly acknowledged and answered by the latest amendments, but there are still these other concerns with the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to add some additional comment. I agree that with our executive officer as well as the public comment that because we are a consumer protection board, we already have laws in place that determine if a nail salon is a healthy salon. You could easily go online, you can look up the establishment license, and so I do agree that this should remain voluntary. I think it coincides with the issue of continuing education and all these things. If a nail salon chooses to, register for this program to demonstrate to the public that they're going above and beyond, I think that's fine, but we've already set minimum standards for health and safety, and I don't think we need to put it in regulation.
I agree with you.
Okay.
So just a comment from me.
Please.
I'm reside in the area where most of the concentration has been with the Healthy Nail Collaborative, and actually we've been to many of their early meetings, Christy and I, as outreach. And I think what they're driving at is more environmental health and safety, not public health and safety. And it's unfortunate that we couldn't have inserted the word environmental into the bill, rather than environmental health and safety, not necessarily, because I think the way it is, it does leave the consumer to believe there's a stamp of approval, and may stop them from checking our websites and others to see if the establishment is in fact disinfects properly. But having said that, I think this is a train we're not going to be able to stop, and they have made changes, and that's why I changed my opinion from opposed to support.
Okay.
Your concerns are why I am going to continue to oppose this legislation.
All right. So I have the motion and I have the second, and I have had public comments. I'm going to call for the vote, and I'm going to start with Mary Lou Amaro.
Yes.
I'm a little bit confused on
The
the
current
vote.
motion is the.
What is the motion?
To support.
To change our position to support.
I oppose.
So no.
Andrew Draken, no.
Richard Hedges, yes.
Dr. Carey Williams, no.
Joseph Federico, no.
Lisa Tong, yes.
Kokolashin, no.
We had a split vote.
I think we're down.
Marcine, how many noes?
We have 4 and 4.
5 noes.
I know, we're down.
So it did not pass.
Oh. Okay. So now we're back at the beginning. We currently still hold so our previous position is still opposed. Do we want to?
I move that we maintain our current position of opposing the bill.
Okay.
Second.
Well, I got a motion and a second.
I'm sorry, who seconded?
Paul.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Do we have to do this because there was a position taken already?
We technically don't.
Well,
So
it's been amended.
it's
so.
been amended. So every time the bill goes through amendment,
Yes,
we kind of
okay.
just reiterate our position.
Thank you.
So okay, I got a motion. I've got a second, and just keep the oppose. So I'm going to call for public comment.
Which
No
one are we on? I'm sorry.
Still no.
Still on
Healthy.
healthy nails.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to go with seeing as there's no public comment, then I am going to call for the vote. And I know what's in. Start with Mary Lou Marlon.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes,
yes
to
to oppose.
Yes.
Andrew Draken, yes.
Richard Hedges, no.
Dr. Carey Williams, yes.
Joseph Federico, yes.
Lisa Tong, no.
Kokolashin, yes.
Oh my goodness.
Motion passes. Motion passes to oppose the bill.
I have a quick clarification of a previous bill. Sorry.
Oh no. Please don't.
AB 1322, which was the alcohol bill. We don't believe there was not. We had an original position of oppose, and we talked about maintaining that position of oppose, but we did not vote.
Did we have? That was the question: is do we have to?
It was amended.
Because it went from wine to beer to beer to wine. Or
Okay. Yeah.
I
I feel like they're hiding something else in there.
Yeah, that dry humor.
That makes a big difference.
So okay. So then returning to the 13. What was it?
1322.
To return to 1322. I'm going to call for the motion to continue to oppose.
Second.
And I got a second. Public comment. No public comment. Mary Lou Amaro.
Okay, so we're opposing, right? Yes.
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 Andrew Draken, no.
Yes, Rich Hedges.
Dr. Carey Williams, yes.
Joseph Federico, yes.
Lisa Tong, yes.
Kokolashin, yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry about that.
I can
It's
use a
all
drink
right.
Moving on.
Let's hope.
Our next bill is AB 2437, which is from Assembly Member Ting. You previously took a position of support on this bill. This bill has had minor changes since the last position. It's the posting of a sign that's developed by this is another labor bill. It is required for a sign to be posted in the back room of a salon, developed by the Labor Commission. However, we would inspect for it and we would cite for it. So it would require us to do regulations, be minimal impact to our board. Yes.
Can we make sure that the labor information on that bill should be the same labor information that the people have to acknowledge when they, according to the other one? So
Certainly.
as long as they read their poster, that's a,
Certainly, that's something that, like the Health and Safety Committee and then the board, when it approves or takes action on whatever the Health and Safety Committee's recommendation are, those would be the kinds of things
Okay.
that you would want to consider.
Can we just clarify that this posting is for employees?
yes.
Yes.
Okay.
It's an
Thank
employee post. It's basically
It's
like
an
a wage and
establishment.
a wage and law poster,
Right.
right? All right. So we currently have a support position. There's been no significant changes that would really affect
Correct.
our support position. So I am going to put forth the motion to continue to support this bill. Unless there
I
are
just looked
questions.
at something. And can I just express
Please.
frustration because of one of the previous bills? This one calls for it to be translated into Spanish, Vietnamese, and Korean. It's like we can only do Korean for one and not for the other. This is why I suggest we somehow develop some kind of a guideline for what languages we do, some minimum threshold, so that way, and we don't have this hodgepodge. Well, this has to be in this, and this has to be in that, and all that. I know we do
Right.
what's right, but I just get frustrated when things are in law haphazardly.
The state
like this.
already has a threshold. Unfortunately, this legislation ignores that threshold.
Well, actually, we have a threshold in the Damali Delator, I'm probably saying it wrong, Act, which is 5% of your
Good.
population, which we already follow, which covers our languages that we already translate into. So it's putting it here, even though there is another act and another law that says the 5%.
I'm just frustrated because the previous
Right.
one doesn't do it in Korean.
No, I
Because
understand.
It's just, but all right, my 2 cents for this one is done.
So I had the motion right, and then did I have the second on the motion?
I'll second it.
All right. So I got a motion. I got a second. I'm going to call for public comment. Seeing as there is no public comment, thank you. I am going to. Oh, please.
My name is Guadalupe Fernandez. I'm the owner of Beyond 21st Century Beauty Academy.
Mm-hmm.
It should all be in English. That's my opinion. Everything should be in English. Testing, everything. Because it really opens a can of worms when we don't have one language that it's not there on the whatever translation of any kind of paperwork. That's all I want to say.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? All right. Mary Lou, it's to you for the vote.
Yes. Yes. Polly Coordinates.
Andrew Jeffkin, yes.
Rich Hedges, yes.
Dr. Carrie Williams, yes.
Joe Federico, yes.
Lisa Tong, yes.
Coco Lashin, yes.
Moving on. The next bill in our agenda packet is AB 2502, which Mr. Hedges had asked for. However, the bill is not moving, so there's no action that's needed today.
I told you earlier when I asked for the stats to be included on the people of our licensed in the state of California who are leaving to go to other states, there was a reason for that. Those of us that already have our homes paid for or in the process of being paid for may not feel the impact of what's happening in the state of California. But where I live, if a new building is built, you're lucky if you can get into that building for first and last month's rent and a clean deposit, which would be around $12,000. $4,200 a month is about the going rate on new 2-bedrooms. Older 2-bedrooms are around $3,500. If you're lucky and you're in a small apartment building that some old timer bought years ago as an investment, they may have kept their rents lower, but that's lucky people. We now have cases where some of the online apps that rent out vacation rentals, some of the apartment owners are evicting people so that they can get on some of those apps. So the pressure on our licensees, both with rent for their establishments and the rent for their homes, in my opinion, is in some ways creating health and safety issues because they're cutting corners. How do I know that? They're telling us that in DRC, that they can't make ends meet on what they charge because there's so much competition and what it costs them to operate. So this bill would have done what was called a Palmer fix. Palmer is a court case that invalidated local zoning and building ordinances that required developers to do a percentage of their apartment as below market rate rent. And where I live, you can, if you're in a below market rate area, you start getting a break if you make a family income of 80 to 120,000 a year. That's how dire it is, how much it costs to rent. And for people that are making 30 or 40 or 50,000 a year, there is no answer. I set on a nonprofit that does not build but encourages the building of below market rate units. Why is that not working? There used to be 20% of redevelopment money that went for below market rate housing. Redevelopment no longer exists. This bill would have amended state legislation that would allow, not force, but allow local communities to have ordinances that actually require a certain amount of below market rate housing. That below market rate housing sunsets in all those ordinances. What we're having now is some of the ones that were done 20 or 25 years ago are sunsetting. No one allows Section 8 in my area anymore. You know, just to give you an example, I don't want to go on too long on this. I went into a local establishment that's a chain and asked if I could speak to the management about attending some of our meetings, about maybe making a donation to our cause. When I told her why I was there, she said, can you help? This is the woman that's a gatekeeper for people who talk to management. She said, can you help me? I have a Section 8 for a 3-bedroom and no one will rent to me. She has 3 children. She's a single parent. So this bill is not going to move this year. Hopefully you and the industry will join with me, with Kevin Mullen, who wrote this bill, Assemblyman Chu, Assemblyman Bonilla, Burke, Campos, Gordon, Thurman, and Ting. Most of them from the area where I live, because that's where the biggest problem is. But it's also here in Sacramento and in Los Angeles as well. And push our legislators statewide to try to get on board with this. It's not something that's onerous. There's so much profit right now in building apartment houses, and there will be for much time to come. So let's try to help the people that actually have created the boom here in California and not force them to leave the state. Because when employers cannot find employees, they will move too. And that's already happening. A major firm, I'm not going to mention names here, did a poll of their employees, and 75% of them asked them to leave the state if they could go with them, and they're moving to Texas. So we're going to kill the dream if we don't have some affordable housing for people. I'm going to get off my soapbox. There's nothing we can do about this bill unless somebody, since I'm speaking, I'm not going to make the motion, would make a motion at least, even though it's not going to move, to support this bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Moving on.
Okay, our next bill is SB 896. This bill we currently have an opposed position on. It has only received some technical cleanup language, but the bill, this is our tipping bill that requires if you accept credit cards for payment of manicuring services that you also have to allow that to be a tip to be placed on that same credit card.
Okay. And currently our position is opposed.
Yes.
And what end of those any real significant changes that have happened
Nope.
in the amendment? Okay. So
is it moving?
Yes.
Then I'm going to reassert our position and say that the state or that we should oppose. Do I have a second?
I second.
All right, got a motion and a second. Public comment.
I just have a question. Does the board oppose the fact that some salons are saying they will charge you extra on your credit card if you put the tip on there?
We're just opposing the bill in general because, well, I could speak for my personally. It basically creates a separation from nail salons versus any other salons, which I don't think that everyone should be playing by the same kind of rules. And what is a nail salon versus what is a regular salon? If I have 12 hair stations and 1 nail station, does that make me a nail salon? So those were the main reasons that I was opposing the bill. And regards to the your question about what business is adding back on credit card charges, that's out of our purview, and that's just up to the individual business, because I know many businesses do that.
I think the other reason the board took the position of oppose, even though I support, was enforcement. I think there was the question of
that's true
of
that's
where that
true.
was enforcement.
And there's no guarantee the employee is going to get the tip. Credit card where they are if it's cash.
All right. Any other public comment on this one?
I would just like to make a comment that I went to a facility and it wasn't for nail services, but I was intending to pay with a card and I couldn't tip, and I felt bad leaving the facility because even if I went back a day later, I didn't know who it was who provided the service to re-tip. So I think as we go forward in a cashless society, this is going to be a bigger issue. But
I understand your concern. The place I go to, I put tips all the time with credit card. It's not an issue. I think the issue may be that if they don't want you to use a credit card, it's because they don't want to have a track of all the payments that come in.
I have a statement. I think also the problem being is the charge on the credit card, that if the owner has 15 stylists and they're having to pay the stylists out the tips, they're being charged for that certain fee, with a fee. So, it's difficult. Now, if each individual had a system where that they could have their own account with their own card, that makes more sense than they are the single person, and it's not such a large amount. But again, I totally understand, being in the industry, that tipping is appreciated by most stylists / nail techs, whatever.
It's just appreciated, expected.
Well, I've always been brought up that you don't expect certain things, you earn them. And but I understand where you're coming from also, but as a owner, I understand the other aspect of the amount that is being charged for the fee.
And
PSPs anyway. So.
And as we move into a cashless society, as business owners, you slowly realize that Visa and MasterCard have become your silent partners and get a cut off the top.
Yeah.
And just to add, if I may, Fred Jones, the bill has been amended to reiterate what they believe is existing law that says the salon owner cannot deduct from that tip any charges made by the credit card company. So we oppose it as a matter of principle. We would be the first industry to have this requirement laid upon us. Bottom line is, don't go to a salon that doesn't treat their stylists with respect, but don't put in statute how they have to micromanage how they operate their business.
Right. So I'm going to call for the vote, since as long as there's no other public comment. So I'm going to start with, once again, Mary Lou.
Yes.
Holly Corness, yes.
Andrew Draken, no.
Rich Hedges, yes.
Dr. Carrie Williams, yes.
Joseph Federico, yes.
Lisa Tong, yes.
Coco Lashin, yes.
All right, motion passes.
Okay, our next bill is SB 1044. This is the bill that we are currently sponsoring. This is the bill that allows us to establish payment plans, and also has us looking at how we will, how and when we will cite an owner and an individual for the exact same violation. The bill has been amended at my suggestion to the author's office, or actually to Assembly Business and Professions Committee, because we found a statute. Well, we have a statute that basically says we cannot renew a license if they haven't paid all their fines. Well, if we're putting people on payment plans, those two statutes would conflict each other. So it changed the shall to a may for the renewal. So basically it allows us to determine if somebody's on a payment plan, we would still allow them to renew their license and continue working.
Okay. Hopefully this one shouldn't cause too much turbulence on the board. So any other
So do we have a position on it?
we're like
We're
support.
supporting it.
We're like,
So,
yeah. If we
We're
could be like
supporting
double
and we're
support.
sponsoring.
okay. I move that we maintain our sponsor and support.
Second.
All right, got a motion. I got a second. Public comment. Seeing as there is none, unless there's any other comment from my fellow board members, I'm going to call for the vote. Starting with Mary Lou Amaro.
Yes.
Holly Cornelius, yes.
Andrew Drafkin, yes.
Rich Hedges, yes.
Dr. Carrie Williams, yes.
Joseph Federico, yes.
Lisa Tong, yes.
Kokolishin, yes.
All right, motion passes.
Our last bill. This is SB 1125, authored by Senator Nguyen, who's also authored the previous bill. This bill we have not looked at before because it started out to be very similar to the AB 2025 earlier. And it was my understanding this bill was not going to be moving forward. However, the bill is moving forward. I think that at the end of the day, it's either going to be 2025, which is much more extensive than 1125. So this bill is an acknowledgement that an applicant understands for an establishment that they're responsible for compliance with any labor laws, that informational materials shall be included with, and it lists the requirements basically the same as what was listed in the prior bill, but it's very, very simple.
So are these competing bills, or would they work in concert with each other if both were passed?
So this bill, from the way I read it, this bill actually requires the acknowledgement that we talked about in the last bill. That's what's required here. So that the applicants include a signed acknowledgement. Well, it actually does still have the word understands in it. Both of the following. So I apologize. I saw the acknowledgement and glossed over the understand. So unfortunately, this has the same flaw in it. It still requires the understanding. The language regarding what that the board develops in terms of the basic labor laws, I think, is a little bit cleaner. Because it says the informational materials that of the state, that the State Board of Barbering and Cosmetology shall select or develop. So it's kind of more of an acknowledgement in this text that the board may choose to simply acknowledge other agencies' publications as opposed to developing its own.
And this is the same author as the previous.
It's a different author. Senator Nguyen is co-authoring the other bill, though.
Oh, okay.
And this bill only addresses establishments as well, whereas 2025
Licensees and establishments.
Right. So again, I didn't think that this bill was going to continue to move, but I think they're both moving just in.
So my question is, if both bills passed, would there be two acknowledgements then on the on an establishment license? No, that's good.
All right, I have a question.
Please.
Would we be, if we take a different position on this than of the previous bill?
Yeah.
If we took a supportive amended on this and a support there, are we in we're speaking out of two sides of our mouth, and are we causing problems again, or should we just?
Or is this where we can voice our concern again with the issue of the understand versus acknowledgement, or does it really even matter because she's just a co-author on the other bill?
I think the board should take a position on the bill as if you're looking at just this bill, and
not acknowledge the other one going forward.
Then I am going to put a motion out there to support, if amended, basically with the same writers and attachments that we had to the other one. We're changing understanding to acknowledgement.
I will second that.
Okay. So I've got a motion and a second. Public comment on this one.
Can we just take one
sorry,
moment?
moving too fast for you?
I'm looking at. There's one change I'm not sure about. I want to.
this bill is addressing nails only.
And I wanted to double check to see whether or not 2120.
Oh, you mean like it wouldn't be all establishment licenses?
Right.
It would
Yeah.
only be a nail establishment license that would have to fill out this acknowledgement?
Correct.
Oh God! I removed my amendment. I removed it.
Oh no, I have to
I
pull my
removed
second
my motion.
Nail care salons, it says right there. Jeez Louise.
I don't think it does.
It's the New York
Yeah.
Times.
Yeah. One article.
Jeez Louise.
It's just all.
Yeah. So 2025 is all. And this bill is only
Just nail care
services.
salons.
Establishments providing or proposing to
Alright.
provide nail care services.
Anybody want to take a stab at a motion on this one? Your silence is so meaningful in this situation.
So let me ask our executive director, how do you feel about this? And I want some direction from you.
I would support if amended and we make it apply to all establishments and
The other
remove the
stuff.
understand.
All right.
That's what I thought you would say.
So your motion's still on. I didn't withdraw my second, so.
Oh, okay. I will amend my original motion to so it's going to be support if amended, and those amendments are that it apply to all establishment licenses, not just nail care salons, as well as the acknowledgements rather than understandings.
Yep.
Okay. Then we got my second over there.
Yep.
Was that just establishments only? Because the other one include licensing.
Well, this one only pertains to establishments. But,
Okay.
but originally it was only
Okay.
pertained to nail
Cool.
care establishments.
Thank
As
you.
written now, it only pertains to nail care establishments,
All right.
and the second was comfortable with that amendment?
Yes. All right. Seeing as there's no public comment, we call for the vote.
Yes. Holly Cornez, yes.
Andrew Drafton, yes.
Richard Hedges, yes.
Dr. Carrie Williams, yes.
Joseph Federico, yes.
Lisa Tom, yes.
Kokolashid, yes.
We're done with legislation.
Oh, wow. That was a wonderful tour of the sausage mill.
May we take a 5 minute?
All right. Moving on.
May we take a 5
Yeah,
minute?
let's take a 5-minute break after all that fun stuff.
We're finally having a long meeting. It's been short.
Yeah. Well, it's 1:20. It's not technically that long yet.